Listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diverse Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, is calling for more extensive health screenings of passengers traveling from areas affected by the Ebola outbreak. The union represents 60,000. 19 airlines. The flight attendants say the globalization of air travel and today's aviation industry requires new, stronger measures to protect passengers and crews. A report from the New York Committee for Occupational Safety and Health, NICOSH, shows 8,600 air hazards to passengers. The hazards include exposure to biohazards like bodily fluids, as well as unlabeled chemical cleaners, diesel emissions, ear-splitting noise, and temperature extremes. The workers most often work for subcontractors who fail to provide them with adequate protective gear and training. NICOSH's Charlene Obernower says these hazards are preventable.
We really found that there were significant hazards and risks to workers' safety, and that many of these safety health hazards that workers face are also hazards that passengers who frequent airports may also be exposed to. A lot of the hazards that are listed here in this report could easily be mitigated, and most of them are actually preventable and would be very small fixes for the employer to address.
The labor union, 32BJ SEIU, plans to hold infectious disease training sessions for New York airport workers next week. Chicago fast food workers are going to Ferguson, Missouri this weekend for Ferguson October, a weekend of resistance. It's 4 days of actions demanding justice for Mike Brown, the unarmed black teenager shot to death by Ferguson police, and to also demand an end to violent policing nationwide. Among many sponsoring organizations are the St. Louis NAACP, Domestic Workers Alliance, Code Pink, and SEIU healthcare workers from Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, and Kansas. 8 New York car wash workers have filed suit against Vegas Auto Spa, claiming more than $600,000 in back wages are owed by the company. The employer's total liability could exceed $1 million. Workers claimed there were overtime and other violations. They say this demonstrates the need for passage of the Car Wash Accountability Act in New York City, which is currently before the City Council. It would require companies to be licensed and to put up surety bonds to cover substantiated claims of wage theft. The nonpartisan Congressional Government Accountability Office has released a study showing that voter turnout in 2 states dropped after they enacted photo voter ID laws. GAO says it compared turnout in Kansas and in Tennessee to turnout in 4 comparison states that had no changes in their voter ID laws from the 2008 to the 2012 general elections. GAO says its study suggests that turnout decreased in Kansas and in Tennessee more than in the selected comparison states of Alabama, Arkansas, Delaware, and Maine. Kansas turnout declined by an estimated 1.9 to 2.2 percentage points, and in Tennessee, voter turnout dropped by 2.2 to 3.2%. The decline was higher among young voters and among African Americans. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
This town gonna be here long after I'm gone. East side, west side, people don't surrender. They've been down, but they still rock on. Oh, and this town is my town. All right, love or hate, it don't matter. I'm gonna stand and fight. This time is my time. She got her ups and downs, but love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause this is my town.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here. Action-packed day today on the program. Lots of folks chiming in on what's going on with education, what's going on with voting. what's going on with the future of the country. Lots of things on the agenda this week. The war on teachers front and center. This attack on the classroom front and center. I mean, pretty much the whole last month, what we've seen is really the ending of the road of a 20-year war on public education. If you remember, a couple of weeks ago, we were focused solely on what was going on in the York City School District, as that body is considering privatizing their entire school district. Think about this for a second. The school board is actually going, you know what? We're going to give up our responsibility, and we're going to give it to this charter operator, and everything will be in the hands of these charter operators. And as I've been saying from the beginning, this is all about union busting and going after the teachers. There are those in the wealth class who believe those teachers have gotten just a little bit uppity. Them and they're wanting health care and wanting a pension and wanting to buy a pair, maybe their own Apple. And what we've seen at least the last month is, and really I think very distinctly highlighted, is what 30 years of this whole push towards, and I would even argue it's probably longer than that. The divisions that have been allowed to be created, be it on socioeconomic grounds, be it on racial grounds, be it on geographical grounds. What's allowed to happen is we've really created a couple of different school districts, a couple of different opportunity zones, if you will, to use a Republican phrase. And now what's going on is the profiteers are going, mission accomplished. We can come in and we take over. And as we talked about yesterday with Bob Herbert, the moneyed interests, while Bill Gates may not be in it for the money, he may actually believe he knows what he's doing and he can change things. The majority of people involved in Education Incorporated are simply about Education Incorporated, how they line their pockets, how they put money in their pockets. And maybe if the kids get an education, well, so be it. So we're going to talk about that, and also the voting thing we talked about yesterday a little bit. If you remember, Senator Bernie Sanders asked for the Government Accountability Office to take a look at what was going on with voting. In fact, he and Patrick Leahy, both of Vermont, said, hey, we want to study on which states were able to suppress the vote, and then compared to the states that hadn't, who was affected. And they found out that about 2 to 3% in the states that they studied, because of these voter ID laws, 2 to 3% of the voters were disenfranchised. And who were they? Well, they're basically your younger voters, and they're your minority voters. And in a number of cases, I would argue your people like my grandmother, seniors who couldn't get to the voter registration polls to show them their whatever, because I don't think my grandmother's had a driver's license in about 15 years. It's been at least 10. I think it's been probably 15 now. It's amazing how time just slips right by you. So we're going to get to that. Also, we're going to talk about our future, because it is Friday, and it is our Future Friday. I'm going to talk with the good folks over at the Campaign for America's Future. Don't know if you saw it yesterday, but looks like Hillary's making the rounds. Hillary was in Philadelphia yesterday doing the fundraising for Democratic candidate Tom Wolf. And she hit on a lot of the themes that I think we're going to be seeing in 2016, and it's about time. Look, and I guess this is one of those moments where you go, Obama was singing from the working class hymnal during his elections. Why would we think that Hillary would do anything less? But I got to be honest, she struck a couple of notes in her remarks for Tom Wolf on Thursday that I think are very important. This idea that we need a stronger minimum wage, we need stronger family leave policies, paid family leave policies, I would hope. She also talked about being a grandmother and the need for all grandchildren to have opportunities, and that comes back to education. I did not see any comments from her on what's going on in Philadelphia. I would be interested in the thoughts there. But, you look at this stuff, and what's important to me is that, right now, if Hillary's going to be in it, that we start pushing her in the direction of, hey, look, we need those things that candidate Obama talked about in 2008. Workers still need the right to organize, and make it easier for workers to organize. It's far too difficult in this country. If we're going to say that we have the right to organize, far too difficult. And hopefully that she becomes that president, or the candidate who's going to push these issues. And by pushing, the hope is that you also push the Republicans into going, yeah, well, we should probably do that too. At least that's how things used to work in the old days, back when my grandparents were in their working years. And I go back to the good socialist President Dwight Eisenhower, who by today's standards, no way he becomes a Republican anything. I don't even know he's conservative enough to be a Democrat, given the political paradigm here in the country right now. Now, at the end of all of this, to me, November 4th, very important day. Fortunately, and I'm going to reinforce this, no voter suppression laws here. They're not going to say, give me your ID, which just seems dumb to me. But understand why they dreamt it up. And it was very well thought out. You got to give them credit. You go back to 2000, and this was the progression. I mean, this progression started back in the 70s, understand. We had Paul Weyrich saying, we don't want everybody to vote. Don't vote. Our power goes up when the electorate goes down. They knew that then. And he had the gall to tell that to a bunch of pastors and ministers and the such. And they've known this, and for years they've been trying to figure out, and I guess both sides have always tried to do it, use their leverage to hold down the opponent's vote. And Republicans right now know that the vote against them are going to be working age people, especially minorities, women, the elderly, and the poor. So if you can suppress those votes, yeah, you're going to do all right. Now, because you got to understand, that's the majority of the people. And here in Pennsylvania, they knew that then. And they knew that, and I think Corbett said it in 2010 when he was candidate. Corbett said, if we could just hold the vote down in Philadelphia, we'll do all right. And they did. You saw them sending out the people in like almost like police uniforms, standing out in front of polling places to try and intimidate people. And you hear stories of the Tea Party folks going out and questioning people in line, just trying to intimidate. And it's just amazing to me that we allow this kind of stuff to happen in a place where we talk about the freedom to vote, and we talk about the right to vote, and we push it around the world. But when it comes to practice at home, I mean, when I went to the Bush Library, and we went down to SMU University there in Dallas, and the woman with the ink on her finger was, big picture of her front and center. One of the main accomplishments. I find it ironic that the guy who's pushing that in Iraq, the woman with the ink on her finger, that's 90% of the people voted in Iraq in that first election. And yet here we don't promote the idea of getting more people out to vote. And we always seem to be trying to make it harder. See, for me, that same day voting, very, very important. Same day registration, same day voting just seems logical. So we're going to talk about all those things. Your thoughts, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back, and we'll get down the road.
Say the USA is drowning in crafted lies. Say the USA and resume the ties it bind. Stop taking all our money and shipping it offshore. Do the job you're looking for.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
From San Francisco, California, this is your World in 2 for Friday, October 10th, 2014. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service.
The Nobel Peace Prize for 2014 is to be awarded to Kailash Satyarthi and Malala Yousafzai for their struggle against suppression of young people and children.
Pakistan's Malala Yousafzai, only 17 years old, was shot by the Taliban for her outspoken advocacy for women's education. And the Indian activist Kailash Satyarthi, meanwhile, is renowned for his work to end child labor. In awarding the Peace Prize today, the committee said the pair have helped to advance the realization of the fraternity between nations, and they cited the fact that 60% of the developing world is under 25 years of age. Heading to North Korea, it's been 5 weeks since Kim Jong-un has been seen in public, and his absence is fueling speculation that he's either fallen very ill or been deposed by the country's ruling elite. That speculation reached a fever pitch today when he failed to appear at a major political ceremony. State media says the ruler is suffering from foot and knee injuries sustained last month, but as time wears on, that explanation seems increasingly untenable. And in a very public showing of anti-Russian sentiment, soccer fans from Ukraine and Belarus joined in song last night at a Euro Cup qualifying match in Belarus. Their chant is an insult to Russian President Vladimir Putin, and it translates as Putin is a dickhead. 8 Ukrainian fans were reportedly arrested for leading that song, but it didn't deter the rest of the crowd. Later in the match, fans sang the popular Ukrainian call and response that involves shouting glory to Ukraine, followed with glory to the heroes. Ukraine defeated Belarus 2-0. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Thomas Bishop. Conservative media and elected officials continue to hype fears that members of the Islamic State terrorist group are using the U.S.-Mexico border to enter the U.S. and launch terrorist attacks. Fox News' Greta Van Susteren recently provided a platform for Representative Duncan Hunter to make this claim.
If you really want to protect Americans from ISIS, you secure the southern border. It's that simple. ISIS doesn't have a navy. They don't have an air force. They don't have nuclear weapons. The only way that ISIS is going to harm Americans is by coming in through the southern border, which they already have.
Tell me what you know.
That I know that at least 10 ISIS fighters have been caught coming across the Mexican border in Texas. There's nobody talking about it. Because I've asked the Border Patrol, Greta.
But according to the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees the border security, this claim is, quote, categorically false. As DHS told the New Republic, this suggestion is, quote, not supported by any credible intelligence or the facts on the ground. For more on this and other stories, visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
Your right to vote. It's one thing you never want to miss out on. This year, the law requires that every Pennsylvania voter show a photo ID at the polls. Getting your free ID is simple and easy. Contact us today.
Smiling faces sometimes pretend to be your friend. Smiling faces show no traces of the evil that lurks within. Can you dig it? Smiling faces.
Oh, yeah. Smiling faces. You know how much money we spent on that ad? We spent, I think it was like $3 million on that ad, that even after the Supreme Court said last November that the photo ID thing was off the table, not going to happen, our governor still said, no, we're going to spend about $3 million worth of taxpayers' money promoting the fact that maybe at some point down the future, hopefully, possibly, you're going to have to show an ID, even though they knew they were going to lose the case. And even though they knew that there had never been a case where the voter ID law that they had pushed had ever happened in the past, they're still pushing it, still using taxpayers' dollars to push it in. Why? Well, my view is pretty simple. To hold the vote down, suppress the vote, and give them the advantage. To me, that's what this is all about. If it's here, Wisconsin, Tennessee, you name it, all across the country where they've done this, that's been the aim. And as we talked about yesterday, in the states that passed the voter suppression laws, the GAO found out that in places like Kansas and I believe it was Tennessee, you saw 2 to 3% of the voters suppressed. Than in states that didn't have these tactics going on. Anyway, last night, big decision. I guess the U.S. Supreme Court made a decision in what's going on in Wisconsin, which is why we've got Jeremy Rosen. He is the director of advocacy at the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty. Jeremy, thanks for taking time for us.
No problem. Glad to be here, Rick.
So the Supreme Court made a decision in the affirmative and struck down the Wisconsin voter suppression law. Am I getting this right?
Well, in part, here's what they did. The Supreme Court essentially said that, look, we had won a decision in the trial court that struck down the law. The Court of Appeals in mid-September decided that the law was, in fact, constitutional and said that the state of Wisconsin in 6 weeks between mid-September and the November election can implement the law. Now, what we learned as soon as they tried to start doing that is that was impossible. There were 300,000 registered voters without the necessary ID. They weren't keeping the DMV open longer. They weren't telling people they need to come in and get ID. They'd mailed out absentee ballots before the decision came down. People had already cast those ballots and were then told later on they would have to turn in ID, even though when they got their instructions for their ballot, they were never told they would have to do that. Supreme Court last night basically said, hold on. After this election is over, we're going to take a look at this law and we'll decide whether it's okay or not. But for now, we're going to tell the state of Wisconsin there's no way you can implement it in time for the November election. So you can't do it.
So this is actually not a full turning the back on the photo ID, but it's holding it off for this election, so that at some point in the future, smarter people can look at it.
That's right. Whether it's at the Supreme Court or it continues to be at the appeals court remains to be seen. But one way or the other, more time will be taken. The law will be fully reviewed and a decision will be reached. Of course, one of the attorneys challenging the law were very optimistic that once that fuller consideration is given, the law will in fact be struck down.
But here's the thing that gets me. I look here in Pennsylvania where our governor pushed for the same kind of voter ID law. And what we found at the time of trial is that the Commonwealth had stipulated to the fact that given the law that they passed, that there had never been a case of voter fraud that the law would have stopped. And that's what the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania stipulated to. There had not been, and there aren't any being prosecuted at this moment, anything that this voter ID law would have stopped. So this idea that we're going to stop voter fraud, is a fraud.
Well, that's absolutely right. And that's just about exactly the same thing that happened in the trial in the Wisconsin case. And in fact, I think in the GAO report that you referred to a minute ago, the GAO indicates that they really haven't found evidence of this. A whole lot of political scientists and other researchers have studied this, and they can't find it either. It's really just not there. So that's the reason they can't find it.
Yeah, because there's no there, which is exactly the reason they can't find it. So as the director of advocacy for the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty, this has got to be one of those things front and center on your plate, because I would have to assume the ability to get and maybe afford one of these photo IDs for someone who's homeless or living in poverty is a hurdle fairly high. And I know here in Pennsylvania, for instance, I believe there are 71 centers across the Commonwealth where you can get these things at. And there are 67 counties. There are actually counties where you can't get one. You got to go miles and miles away, which I gotta wonder would be very difficult for someone who is homeless or someone living in poverty.
Well, that's exactly right. Of course, we wish that everybody who is homeless would have an ID because IDs are a useful thing to have. The fact remains that a lot of people don't have them, and people shouldn't be forced to get them just to be able to exercise their fundamental constitutional right to vote. In Wisconsin, there's only one Department of Motor Vehicles office that's even open on the weekend. So if somebody may be working, they can't get to the DMV between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. They can't get their free ID. They may need to produce documents in order to get the free ID. And if they can't pay for some of those documents, then how are they going to get the ID? They won't be able to do it.
Yeah, but here's the thing that gets me. Are we not now talking about a poll tax? Because, you look at this and to be able to, let's say, I don't even know where my birth certificate is, to be honest with you right now. So I would have to jump through a number of hoops to either find it or get it. I've been registered to vote since I've been 18. They know exactly who I'm at. Wouldn't this make these hurdles at some point? Doesn't this kind of look and smell like a poll tax to you?
It absolutely does in a number of these cases. And in fact, in between the time when we tried our case and made the argument that this was a poll tax and the time that the Supreme Court considered the case, the Wisconsin Supreme Court actually issued a decision in another case challenging the law under state law. And in fact, they found that this requirement of having to pay for documents in order to get ID essentially was a poll tax. And they actually ordered the state of Wisconsin to stop charging people for those documents. So they actually told the state that if people come in and they say they can't afford to get these documents, you actually need to help them provide the documents, or you need to find another way to verify their information, because it would be a poll tax.
Because I got to be honest, even if there's the other part of this is, if you're mandating that I have this as an obstacle to my foundational right of this democracy to that ballot box, I think all of that should be free and should be tax free and poll tax free for everyone, not just people who claim to be indigent.
Well, that's absolutely right. We couldn't agree with you more on that point. There's nothing, opponents or proponents of voter ID laws like to say, you need an ID for all sorts of things. In fact, that isn't really the case. They say you need an ID to fly, but if in fact you forget your ID at home, there are ways to get through airport security.
Is there? I've yet to be able to do that. But here's my problem with that whole argument, Jeremy. I may not have a fundamental constitutional right to fly or rent a hotel room or rent a car or whatever, but the foundation of our democracy, the whole point of this experiment of self-governance, is our access to that ballot box. I think my right to that ballot box should be much higher than renting a hotel room or getting on an airplane or any of that stuff. I think that should be sacrosanct. There should be nothing blocking me from the access to my participation in this experiment of self-governance.
Well, that's absolutely right. And if there is going to be anything that blocks that, there better be a very good reason for doing it. And that's the critical part of these voter ID cases, is there's just absolutely no reason for doing it except to suppress the votes of particular groups.
And now that we see this, and now that you see this study from the GAO, and I've seen other reports that say the exact same thing, and just from a common sense point of view, Jeremy, we know that the elderly, the poor, people who are homeless, we know those are folks who are not going to have IDs. I think of my grandmother, for instance. She hasn't driven in probably 15 years. Her license is expired years and years ago, and there's no need for her to have one. We know that from just a common sense, logical point of view, that the idea is to get her to stop voting, especially a generation that is overwhelmingly Democratic.
Well, that's absolutely right. And in fact, in Wisconsin, it appears that if you added up these populations, it came to about 9% of all registered voters in the state. That's a huge number. I mean, As you pointed out before, elections can depend on 1% to 2% of voters who may or may not vote a particular way or for a particular candidate. To say that you were going to disenfranchise 9% of voters was, I think, a pretty outrageous decision by the Court of Appeals. And that's why, that's why John Roberts and Anthony Kennedy, two Supreme Court justices who nobody would call liberal, certainly, voted with us to say this law could not be put in place.
Here in Pennsylvania, the guy who's the head of the Republican Party here in PA, Rob Gleason, he said after the 2012 election that the voter ID laws, in his opinion, was responsible for a 5% swing in the vote from Obama to Romney. They actually believe that just the threat of showing an ID, the threat of this law, actually swung the vote by 5%, which I think is an enormous statement.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly difficult to measure, but I think it's understandable to say that, if people are told that there are going to be difficult barriers in place, even if there may be some chance that they could overcome them with a lot of work and effort, just imposing those barriers makes a lot of people just give up and say, forget about it, we're not going to do them.
So just to end this point, as of now in Wisconsin, no voter ID. But they're going to pick it up after the election, and possibly in the future, this may still be something that has to be fought with.
That's right. We're not out of the woods yet, but the good news is at least we halted the chaos that was going on the ground, and we put in place a clear rule for this November's election. There will not be voter ID needed in Wisconsin.
Now, will the state of Wisconsin have to go and spend millions of dollars telling people they don't have to have one, as I'm sure they did, telling people they did?
It'll be interesting to see what they do in that regard. One of the arguments we actually made is they hadn't been spending money to tell people that they did, and that was one of the reasons why the law shouldn't have been implemented on short notice. So it'll be interesting to see what they do now over the next few weeks.
Listen to the Rick Smith Show here with Jeremy Rosen, Director of Advocacy with the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty. The last thing I wanted to talk to you about is today is World Homelessness Action Day. World Homeless Action Day. Tell me what's going on.
Absolutely. This is really just a day where we think it's very important for people to reflect on the fact that there continues to be significant homelessness and poverty in our midst. And we should all be looking for opportunities where we can find them to address those issues. And, we more commonly focus on issues that relate to housing and to the social safety net. But I think the voter ID issue is a good reminder of the fact that it's equally important to make sure that everybody in this country has an opportunity to participate in the political process.
Yeah, and to me, this is a time to start talking about how we, as a society, end homelessness, because I think the money that we're wasting on locking people up and on punitive action, like passing ordinances, not allowing people to sleep on the street and idiotic things like that, if we were to spend that money and that energy and those resources at giving people homes and places that would put shelter over their head, I think we'd be much further down the road. And I look at places like Denver, where they've just opened up a facility to give a couple hundred people a place to live with mental health care and health care access and all of the things that homeless people need to help them to move to the next level of becoming more productive citizens in our society.
Well, that's absolutely right. And actually, not only can we make the moral case for doing that, but you can really make the financial case for doing it. All the money that's being spent on unproductive solutions is not actually solving the problem, but you're still spending the money. It would be far better to spend the same amount of money, or in many cases, even less. For example, housing costs much less than incarcerating people on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it's always blown my mind. Always blows my mind. We're going to put somebody in jail for $20,000-$30,000 a year in a jail, but we won't pay $500 a month so they can have a place to live. It just seems dumb to me. But I guess when you look at the for-profit prison industry, you then kind of get the idea of why.
Yeah, I mean, that's I think that's one issue. I think communities are just in a rut. They don't know what to do, and so the rote response is to go out and arrest people and lock them up. Yeah. we and I think other advocates are trying to go out there across the country and make the case to say, hey, everybody wants the same thing, which is to have nobody living outdoors on our streets. Question is how we're going to get there, and housing solutions are a lot smarter.
So today on World Homeless Action Day, what's the action? What are we telling people?
Provide housing, support the human right to housing, don't incarcerate people unless we can end homelessness in this country.
There you go. Jeremy, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Jeremy Rosen, Director of Advocacy over at the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty. We've got a link to their website at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Jeremy's names. Take you right there. And remember, November 4th, get out and vote.
Turn out for what? Turn out for what?
I'm Darren, and I'm turning out for education.
I'm EJ, and I'm turning out for marriage equality.
My name is Lil Lena, and I'm turning out for reproductive rights.
Turn out for what?
Do you believe, sir, in global warming?
Senator Mitch McConnell dodges the climate change question.
So, gentlemen, we're now going to move to yes or no questions. Do you believe humans are contributing significantly to climate change?
Well, I've said all along, climate is changing.
This is yes or no.
Look,
Yes
this
or
is
Republican candidates retreat from climate denial. U.S. auto fleet achieves record fuel efficiency. Plus,
Is regular clean clean enough for your family? Not when you can have clean coal clean.
clean coal goes online in Canada. But there's a catch.
Say it ain't so. All of those catches and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Senator, that's a yes or no question. Do you believe in global warming?
It is not a yes or no question.
Old boy came out a little defensive, a little ballsy, I think, with a little attitude.
a little bit of a jerk, maybe. Came across those.
A little bit of a jerk? Not my Senator Mitch McConnell. This is your Green News Report. Yep. Okay, Desi Doyen. So the climate change denialism from Republicans in the primaries is now coming back to haunt the Republicans in the generals.
Yup. But we'll have more on that in a moment. First, good news. The U.S. has hit a record for fuel efficiency. Despite 40 years of obstruction from the U.S. auto industry, the Obama administration in 2009 finally succeeded in setting higher mileage standards for cars and trucks so you don't have to buy so much gas. And now the Environmental Protection Agency announced this week that new cars and trucks sold in the U.S. have hit a record for fuel economy, 24 miles per gallon fleet-wide. And surprise, the auto industry did not collapse.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought that nobody wanted fuel-efficient cars and that it would, like everything else Republicans are concerned about, destroy the economy.
And again, they were wrong. Meanwhile, with the midterm elections less than 1 month away, finally, the corporate media has decided that climate change is now a thing and is asking about it in every major race. So, of course, now Republicans are backing off their earlier outright denial in the primaries, since now they have to appeal to voters in the general election. In Colorado, the Republican candidate for U.S. Senator, Representative Cory Gardner, tried retreat and evasion.
Do you believe humans are contributing significantly to climate change?
Well, I've said all along, climate is
This
changing.
is yes or no.
Look,
Yes
this
or
is an important issue, and I don't think you can say yes
But
or
you've
no.
got
It's an
60
important
seconds after.
I believe the climate is changing. I disagree to the extent that has been in the news that man has caused.
Congressman. And Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky evaded the question, too, with the old "I am not a scientist" dodge. And he did it twice in 1 week.
We can debate this forever. George Will had a column in the last year or so pointing out that in the 70s we were concerned that the Ice Age was coming. I'm not a scientist.
Yeah, neither is Fox News' George Will, by the way. And in the 70s, when there was a tiny handful of scientists concerned about an ice age, the majority of climate scientists were still worried about global warming that guys like Mitch McConnell pretend is not going on.
Now, that interview was with the Cincinnati Enquirer. McConnell did it again in a testy interview with Kentucky Sports Radio.
Do you believe, sir, in global warming?
have said repeatedly is I'm not a scientist, but what I can tell you is even if you thought that was important, and there's some scientists who do and some scientists who don't, but even if you thought that was important, the United States doing this by itself is going to have zero impact.
So do you, but that's a yes, Senator, that's a yes or no question. Do you believe in global warming?
It is not a yes or no question. I'm not a scientist.
I love the fact that he's not a scientist, but he is a scientist enough to know that doing anything about the problem will have no effect on the global climate. Go figure.
Yeah.
Mitch McConnell, occasional scientist.
Meanwhile, in an attempt to save the coal industry from its own pollution, the U.S. taxpayer has already spent over $5 billion on an experimental plant to capture carbon emissions from burning coal. That's commonly referred to as clean coal.
Clean coal harnesses the awesome power of the word clean.
Clean coal is supported by the coal industry, the most trusted name in coal.
Yes, it is.
Now, that expensive experimental plant in the U.S. is in Mississippi. But in Canada, the world's first carbon capture coal plant is now online. But there's a catch to these projects, as noted by Chris Hayes on MSNBC.
We will be actually selling the carbon dioxide to an oil company to help them take more petroleum out of the ground.
You heard that right. The carbon captured by this clean coal plant is going to facilitate oil drilling.
Hooray! By the way, kudos to Chris Hayes. You know, we have been beating up on the media for years for not covering climate change, and Chris Hayes has been doing all week a special on coal country with a lot of great stories and a lot of great interviews. So we should note when someone in the mainstream media actually gives this issue the coverage it deserves. For much more of the coverage it deserves, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. While you're there, please consider a donation to help the Green News Report stay on your public airwaves. Don't forget, you can find us and follow us on the Twitters and the Facebook at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Can you hear the death knell toll for old King Cole?
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
We need to stand united, for undivided, we shall never fall. Remember all, we need to trust in and then forever call our brothers and our sisters. And are you and I are win. You and I both know that we can rely on it. The time is prime, planets aligning, no mistaken. For union resurrection, the anger has awakened. The sleeping giant, come on, yeah, we can do it. We need to revive, re-amp, and re-up the labor movement. Anything in life was
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. November 4th, right around the corner. Hope it's circled on the calendar. Hope the red ink, bright, blaring. Got to get out on that Tuesday to go out and vote. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, the governor's race is over. I don't have to do it. Get out there and vote. It's the only way it happens. Anyway, here to talk a little bit about voting and why we should be getting out to vote. I've got Don Furco. He's with Steelworkers Union, 1557. Don, thanks for taking time for us.
Absolutely. No problem. My pleasure.
So November 4th, right around the corner. Why bother? I mean, it looks over. Wolf's up by 20 points. Why bother?
Why bother? That's what the Republicans would rather us not do, is to not show up to vote. And in fact, they've done everything they can to keep us from voting.
Yeah, I mean, because what's fearful for me is they've got us thinking the gubernatorial race is over, and it might be for maybe, I don't know. We won't know until the ballots are counted. But it's all the other elections that aren't over that I worry about.
That's right. You know, if you don't show up to vote for the governor's race, there's plenty of other races out there. You know, your state reps, your state senators. Well, I don't think it's a Senate race this time around, but you know, your also your U.S. representatives. You know, you've got
the whole congressional delegations up. We get to get to me next time around. But the reality is, and I can't either, to be honest. But the reality is you know I think we've almost been lulled to sleep. Because I was just talking to a guy the other day who says, I don't see all of the political ads and all this stuff. I'm not seeing that kind of fervor. So what I'm afraid of is that we're going to have that fall off of, well, I didn't know. I'm telling you, November 4th, right?
November 4th, absolutely. Yeah, I've noticed that myself. I don't see a lot of ads hitting us in the face yet, but
maybe it comes.
It's still about a month away, but I do see the signs. I see some of them disappearing and then reappearing. Right. So a little bit of shenanigans going on here and there. But
But one of the things that gets me, and this governor, and if I can beat up on the governor again, of which he deserves an awful lot, one of the things that he did during his tenure as governor was pursue this ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council piece of legislation, to put a roadblock between me and my ballot box. And even up until even in the last election, where it was already ruled you can't do it, they were still pushing this idea that you got to have a photo ID every time you vote because, hey, you need one when you go to the hotel, right?
Right. Well, it's definitely a roadblock for certain individuals. Students, whenever you turn 18, not everybody drives whenever they turn 18. So might not have a picture ID there.
My grandmother,
exactly. Grandma might not have one. And you've got a lot of people who live in the city who don't need a car, who rely on public transportation, which is another subject altogether. But considering they can just take a bus wherever they have to go, they don't really need an ID. And considering there's 67 counties in this state, and there's only 71 DMVs, obviously you're not going to have one per, because Philadelphia County is also coterminous with Philadelphia, the city. They've got 5.
Right.
And you would think the most populous,
somebody else got cheated.
Yeah, that's right. You've got 9 counties that have no DMV whatsoever, and another 16 where the county has their DMV is only open 1 or 2 days a week. So very, very hard to get that photo ID.
Is that done now? I mean, the court has ruled it unconstitutional. Is it dead?
We think so, but you never know. It could come back up, just like the Liquor Control Board,
the privatization,
privatization of that, as well as the Turnpike, and so forth. So, things just keep on popping back up.
They never seem to die.
They do not.
They go dormant for a bit and then they pop back up, or they find a new incarnation. And what I think is going to happen, the new incarnation of voter suppression won't be the ID anymore. It'll be shrinking the number of hours we can vote, like in Ohio. They're trying to do away with. But again, to me, the whole foundation of this experiment, the whole foundation of, I think, what makes our country exceptional is that foundation of the ballot box. And I hear this all the time. Rick, well, you need to have a driver's license to get a hotel room or to rent a car. The problem is our entire foundation of our nation isn't based on me getting a hotel room or a car. It is based on my right to that ballot box.
Well, it's not like you're purchasing anything either. If you're renting a car or going and renting a hotel room, you're making a purchase where, you're exercising your right as an American citizen to vote.
Yeah, because aren't we all owners of the country? I mean, isn't that how the whole thing goes? It's our democracy. It's our country. That whole we the people, of, for, and by we the people.
That's what the country was founded on.
Just a thought. So when you look at this stuff and you're out doing the get out the vote activities that you guys are doing, does this issue keep popping up? Because I got to imagine that, especially in high poverty areas where people can't afford to take a day off to work, to go down to the DMV to get this ID that is that weight on their mind at some point.
Pardon?
I got to think that's on their mind at some point.
Of course it is.
It's been hammered into them, especially in high poverty areas. The buses had it on they were running radio ads for months around the election time just to keep people away from the polls.
Yeah, absolutely. They're trying to suppress the elderly, the poor, and keep them out, because honestly, some of them have the time to go and vote. Now, if they can't, there's 30, I believe it was actually, it was 9,300 polling places in the state. And so that's quite a lot more than, that's a huge number compared to the amount of DMVs. So, your polling place might be right down the road. But
so we in favor of same day registration?
Absolutely.
We're in favor of expanding because it's always amazing to me that we have this voting that is, as we've kind of laid out, the foundation of the nation, that it's only on the second Tuesday in November for a limited number of hours.
Right. And if you don't have a photo ID, in order to register to vote, in order to register, you either have to have a driver's license number or the last 4 digits of your Social Security. So obviously,
virtually
it's easy enough. Everybody's got
that.
You should have that on the top of your head no matter what. So, they're just trying to go with the other route and make it a photo ID to register and to vote.
Because if I remember right, there were a number of other ways. If you had, like a utility bill in your name from your address, they just want to make sure that you are who you are and you live in that district, which seems logical to me on a certain level. I don't want someone like the woman who's running for attorney general in Arkansas who was registered in Virginia and Washington, D.C. while simultaneously voting in Arkansas. I don't want that.
Right. It sounds reasonable, but at the same time, if there's no evidence of voter fraud, then why go through this and why make it more difficult?
And that's the thing that got me. Did you follow the trial? The voters, when they took it to the Supreme Court?
I did a little bit.
In a stipulation of fact. This is what they stipulated. Because at the beginning, both sides go, we agree on this. Both sides agreed there had never been a case of voter fraud found, either prosecuted, either attempted to prosecute. Never. They hadn't found it.
Right.
But they still had to go after this because it might be out there.
They're afraid of us. It's the bottom line. They're afraid of
Do you think
voters
that's what it is?
out en masse. Absolutely.
Do you think it's that they're afraid that people are going to wise up, that eventually we'll stop eating the BS that they're shoveling us, and we'll maybe turn a different path?
I certainly hope so. I hope that's they're afraid of massive amounts of voters turning out. The better the polls, the better for the Democrats.
Yeah, well,
the better the turnout.
For me, I've always been of the mindset, when you get people active and engaged, maybe we get some choices. Because in too many races, in my view, the Democrat and the Republican don't look a whole lot different.
This is true, and I can't beat down the Republicans too badly. Tim Murphy, he votes for Labor quite a bit. He's a friend of Labor most of the time. Not so good on trade.
Like he was with Arlen like Arlen was.
Right. Well,
except when you need him.
Right. It's right. Absolutely.
May he rest in peace.
Well,
the guy who killed the Employee Free Choice Act. Yeah.
Well, you hate to see anybody pass from cancer, but right.
But here again, I go back to this. When you give people choices, I hope that they go the right way. And the other part of this is, outside of the voter suppression, is the money that we see in politics, the obscene amount of money, and this whole push towards corporate personhood. There's so much to this that I fear the future of democracy in our country.
Well, yeah, if you've got the money, you can sway the public by throwing out as many nasty ads as possible. So,
which is why it's important that guys like you and the steelworkers and other unions are out knocking on doors and talking to people, because I still think there's that one-to-one connection, or at least I hope. I hope neighbors talking to neighbors, family members talking to family members is still how we do things. It's just not what we see on TV.
And that's what rapid response, that's the division that I deal with the most. And that's the conference that I'm at right now. Rapid response, that's the main thing, is it's nonpartisan. We're supposed to supposed to talk about the issues and inform the public and our members and tell them, okay, this candidate is for us, this candidate's against us. Could be a Republican over a Democrat. It's not likely, but
yeah. No, I mean, I would like to go back to the days. And I spoke earlier with a couple of people about Dwight Eisenhower, and I often call him a socialist, because by today's political framework, he'd be a communist by today. But he had written a quote to his brother Edgar that said, anyone who's against labor laws or unemployment or Social Security or any of those things, they would never be heard from.
Right.
He said there are a few there are a couple Texas oil millionaires, a couple of businessmen, but their numbers are negligible and they are stupid. The sad reality is right now it seems like stupid's running the country.
Yeah, you could say that.
I just did.
Yeah, I know.
And the hope is that we wake up and realize that too much of stupid is running our country. And talking about, you look at our military, for instance. The DOD issued 275,000 waivers to the Berry Amendment, which meant $164 billion worth of our tax dollars that were supposed to go into fixing things for our military ended up overseas. What I can only think stupid did that.
You're articulating it quite well. I can't argue with you.
Well, I would hope not, because you can't argue with common sense. But the sad reality is stupid seems to be taken over, and we need to pull that back, and which is why I think November 4th is so important.
Well, look at what we've got going on here in Pennsylvania with Tom Corbett. He doesn't want to tax Marcellus Shale. We're the only state of 33 that have such activities going on, drilling, we don't tax it.
But Don, if we tax it, they won't drill.
That's a load of crap. And you know it. I know it. Everybody that's listening knows it.
The only way that would work is if there was a China plan. When I was a kid, they would say if you dig far enough down, you'd hit China. The only way that they wouldn't come here is if they could come through China.
Well, if you dig far enough down, maybe you can throw a couple of people down in the hole, because you're not going to reach China.
No,
it's a little hot down there.
It is what it is, but it brings us back to the point of, you're right. They didn't tax it, and we end up seeing the problems around our state that we see. Lower funding for education, infrastructure that's crumbling, programs for seniors that are struggling. They cut off. I mean, you can just tick down the list of all of the negative things this governor has. Well, if you want to call them accomplishments, it's what they are. I don't see any positives, though.
No, I don't see a lot of positives either. I know that the state's really good for children that are lagging behind, the intermediate unit and so forth, but the food stamps.
Well, they better be. They better be, because we're creating an awful lot of them.
Right. SNAP. I know that the food stamps in the state, that
it's a federal program.
It's a federal program. Well, the federal program sucks too, but
but it's administered by the state.
I know a person who had pancreatic cancer and can't work. She's legitimately disabled and is not eligible for food stamps because of her disability income
and because of her assets. Now that is right. Governor Corbett.
Yeah, that's
this
horrible.
Idiotic asset test that we can't help you until you're actually absolutely indigent is completely ludicrous.
So instead, you're forced to go to a food bank. It's the only other thing. Unless you want your kids to starve. 2 kids, divorced, disabled. What are you going to do?
That's a horrible story.
It is.
And it's what's been brought to us by this not just Corbett, but by his whole ideology and that whole thought process that have had complete control of our state for the last 3 years. So that answer, come November 4th, get out and vote, right?
That's right. Get out and vote November 4th en masse.
Don, I appreciate you taking time for us. As I've said, the only time things change is when the people in charge fear their heads on platters or sticks. But Don, I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Don Furco, USW Local 1557. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Time to talk.
Just one more thing, just to play the game. But the castles crumble and you're left with just a day.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
It's always inspiring to see global corporate giants crush small farmers, stomp on nature, circumvent our laws by hook or crook, and deceive and gouge consumers. Welcome once again to the phantasmagoric world of DNA manipulators. In particular, this branch of genetic engineering wizardry calls itself, quote, synthetic biology. Yes, that's an oxymoron, meaning fake life. But it's also moronic in this case, for it's a crude and costly attempt by high-tech alchemists at such corporate powers as BASF and Cargill to genetically modify microorganisms to produce something wholly unnecessary, artificial flavorings and fragrances. One of their, quote, achievements is to use a powerful form of gene-altering technology to re-engineer yeast and make synthetic vanilla. Hello, of all the world's needs, why put so much money and scientific energy into something that's on every grocery shelf, both in a natural and artificial form? Also, this corporate wizardry creates a massive threat to the livelihoods of thousands of small tropical farmers in developing nations. Madagascar, for example, one of the world's poorest countries, has 80,000 farmers whose only reliable cash crop is vanilla beans. I really count on that to make a living, says one. Well, sniff the faraway synthetic makers, we can do it cheaper. But can do is not the same as will do. Even though the lab-made vanilla is not as good as nature's own, corporations will use their political and marketing muscle to capture the market and jack up prices. Advertising gimmickry is already in play, for the industry claims that its fake stuff is a natural product. Therefore, it need not be labeled as a GMO, even though it is. This is Jim Hightower saying, to get a bigger whiff of this outrage, go to Friends of the Earth at FOE.org.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's populist take on what the powers that be are up to. Find out more at hightowerlowdown.org.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, is calling for more extensive health screenings of passengers traveling from areas affected by the Ebola outbreak. The union represents 60,000 flight attendants at 19 airlines. The flight attendants say the globalization of air travel and today's aviation industry requires new, stronger measures to protect passengers and crews. A report from the New York Committee for Occupational Safety and Health, NICOSH, shows 8,600 air hazards to passengers. The hazards include exposure to biohazards like bodily fluids, as well as unlabeled chemical cleaners, diesel emissions, ear-splitting noise, and temperature extremes. The workers most often work for subcontractors who fail to provide them with adequate protective gear and training. NICOSH's Charlene Oberauer says these hazards are preventable.
We really found that there were significant hazards and risks to workers' safety, and that many of these safety health hazards that workers face are also hazards that passengers who frequent airports may also be exposed to. A lot of the hazards that are listed here in this report could easily be mitigated, and most of them are actually preventable and would be very small fixes for the employer to address.
The labor union, 32BJ SEIU, plans to hold infectious disease training sessions for New York airport workers next week. Chicago fast food workers are going to Ferguson, Missouri this weekend for Ferguson October, a weekend of resistance. It's 4 days of actions demanding justice for Mike Brown, the unarmed black teenager shot to death by Ferguson police, and to also demand an end to violent policing nationwide. Among many sponsoring organizations are the St. Louis NAACP, Domestic Workers Alliance, Code Pink, and SEIU healthcare workers from Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, and Kansas. 8 New York car wash workers have filed suit against Vegas Auto Spa, claiming more than $600,000 in back wages are owed by the company. The employer's total liability could exceed $1 million. Workers claimed there were overtime and other violations. They say this demonstrates the need for passage of the Car Wash Accountability Act in New York City, which is currently before the City Council. It would require companies to be licensed and to put up surety bonds to cover substantiated claims of wage theft. The nonpartisan Congressional Government Accountability Office has released a study showing that voter turnout in 2 states dropped after they enacted photo voter ID laws. GAO says it compared turnout in Kansas and in Tennessee to turnout in 4 comparison states that had no changes in their voter ID laws from the 2008 to the 2012 general elections. GAO says its study suggests that turnout decreased in Kansas and in Tennessee more than in the selected comparison states of Alabama, Arkansas, Delaware, and Maine. Kansas turnout declined by an estimated 1.9 to 2.2 percentage points, and in Tennessee, voter turnout dropped by 2.2 to 3.2%. The decline was higher among young voters and among African Americans. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Yeah, I think we do. I think we know the enemy. The enemy is Education Incorporated. It's not the local public schools. It's not my local public school teacher. It's not the fact that they want pensions or health care or a decent living. Nothing to do with that. To me, the enemy is the profit that they want to steal out of the classroom, and all of this push towards corporatizing my kids' future and corporatizing our what I believe is part of the commons, part of what we should be doing for ourselves. There shouldn't be a profit motive to this. But what we've seen going on across the country, and not just in the York City School District, as Mosaica and U.S. Charters are trying to take over that district, or in Philadelphia, where the SRC just kicked kicked the teachers in the backside and ripped up their contract and imposed their will. It's going on all over the country. I'm here to talk a little bit about it. I've asked Shaun Johnson. He's an educator, education advocate, and also a fellow talk radio host of At the Chalk Face, at thechalkface.com, the website. Shaun, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You know, I look at this and, as an educator, I can't imagine what you go through on a daily basis with all of the messaging that you seem to be the problem that we can't get funding for education.
Yeah, I just want to take the time to apologize for being such a terrible person. I never knew that I was to blame for everything.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you remember the messaging from the Bush collapse, it was you and cops and firefighters and those public sector workers who brought the collapse about. So you've got a lot to be sorry for.
I got a lot on my shoulders, to be honest with you, and it really is difficult to wake up every morning. I got to tell you.
And I don't know that I want you with that weight on your shoulders when you're charged with I think the most precious resource our country has, and that's our children's future.
Absolutely. I mean, but fortunately or unfortunately, I guess, we're busy enough on a day-to-day basis that, those kinds of things tend not to weigh on our minds until late into the evening when we're trying to sleep. So.
And grading papers and tests and all that stuff sure keeps you up late. But, when you look at this, I mean, my 12-year-old came home not too long ago, said, Dad, I'd like to be a teacher. And I got to be honest with you, Shaun, I cringed. I'm like, no.
Yeah, you shouldn't. You shouldn't feel bad about that being your initial reaction. I mean, I think a lot of people who are going to spend now, thousands of dollars and going into massive debt to have their child want to go into something like that. I think your natural reaction is what it is. Perfectly natural, perfectly reasonable, given the amount of, student loans that someone has to take out to go through college. So, I mean, it's totally fine, reasonable.
Yeah, yesterday I had a nice conversation with Bob Herbert, the former New York Times columnist, talking about who's killing education, and he had a great piece on exactly who it is, and it's this whole push towards privatization and really profitization, trying to pull profit out of educating my kids, and I think I have a serious problem with that.
Well, and I think you should, because the goals of, say, for-profit or free market-based methods or ideas sort of run counter to education. Education is a very expensive enterprise. You have to be willing to put money into it to do it really, really well. And, the idea of competition and free market ideologies sort of run counter to it. They sort of contradict or are anathema. So, I do agree that you should feel very uncomfortable with those kinds of ideologies creeping into a public institution.
But we've been sold for so long, Shaun, on this idea that we have to compete. We've always got to be competing, and the one that does the best wins. And I think we've kind of pushed that into education.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of folks out there realize that this is a really huge untapped marketplace. You've got billions and billions of dollars in here, and there's a way to access those pure people expenditures, and rather than reinvesting in education itself, there's a way to pull the money out of the public institutions and, find a way to profit from it. And so, unfortunately, you have a lot of shareholders and people with private interests that are more willing to innovate and get into education than otherwise. And so there definitely is a huge private free market influence that is taking the public good, the basic social contract out of educational institutions.
Now, there's this strong belief that, well, I should have choice, and I get this a lot. Why can't I have choice of where my kids go to school? And it's an interesting argument, but the sad reality is when I look around, I don't know that you really have true choice, or am I mistaken?
Well, it's interesting because, you look at where I'm at. I'm in Washington, D.C., for example, and, you think, okay, well, who cares really what's going on in D.C.? Well, you could argue that it's the nation's capital, and so it's sort of a model for the rest of the nation. But, this is happening in numerous urban areas throughout the country, Philadelphia, even Pittsburgh, where you have, it's not true choice when you've got these private developers coming in and turning all of the schools into charters. So you look at the charter chain, and they've got similar ways of practicing teaching. They've got similar uses of curriculum. They've got these no excuses methodologies. And so there really isn't a lot of choice per se. Yeah, as a parent, you can pick a different school, when you really get down to it, these schools aren't that much different when you see how the students are being taught, what kinds of curriculum they're using. So it's really not choice per se. It's choice away from public education to something different that is in and of itself becoming standardized, the sort of standard private equity model of education.
And the studies have shown, and maybe you've got a better handle on this as someone in the classroom, the studies have shown that they're not better.
No, they're not. And, even if you do find some studies or some investigations that based on test scores, maybe there's slight growth. It's completely, the amount of growth that you actually see is not worth the amount of disruption and disorganization, sort of this practice of disaster capitalism that occurs in these major urban areas. And so, with mixed results, the amount of chaos and disorganization and disruption that's caused in these poor Black and brown communities in major metropolitan areas, I mean, we're not getting, to use an economic term, to use their own language, we're not getting a reasonable return on investment in any way, shape, or form.
But is it really about us getting a return on investment? I would have to think it's more about them getting a return on investment.
Oh, absolutely. And so even by their own metrics, I mean, you look in Washington, D.C., so even by, their own metrics, and when I say they, I mean those that, have this sort of free market-minded understanding of public schooling, that we need to treat schools and districts like businesses. Even if we use their metrics, which are just basic standardized test scores, D.C. is worse in every single way since 2007, when we had Michelle Rhee and the primary sort of engines of education reform going through the district and all of the disruption that went along with it. So since No Child Left Behind was passed in 2001, nothing has improved. Test scores are flat. So on their metrics alone, their methodologies and the ways of doing things have failed. That's tremendous evidence that we should be going in a different direction.
Yeah. Have any of these profiteers asked you or any other teachers their opinions on what we should be doing instead of this, what appears to be a top-down imposing model that we've been seeing?
I think there's a lot of lip service paid, and I think the idea is, just like on Capitol Hill, you get one Democrat that joins Republicans, and they call the bill bipartisan. And so you get one teacher that may be somewhere in the chain of discussion or, innovation, whether a new method or a new curriculum or new standards comes along. You get one teacher in the room, and then automatically, we had teacher support for it. So I don't think they've really asked educators, and you could go to professional developments like I do, district-wide workshops. No one's really interested in your opinion. No one's really interested in answering your questions. They're just trying to steamroll over you with their way of doing things, and that's it.
So how should we be going about this? I mean, I often, as a parent, I've got 3 kids in the public schools, and I'm distressed at the amount of standardized testing and the focus on the testing. And I've had numerous conversations where teachers have tried to allay my fears that my kids aren't learning enough by saying, don't worry, they'll pass the test. And I say, I don't really care about them passing the standardized test. I care if they actually know it.
Well, and that's tough. We have to sort of, and this is difficult because we have to sort of put a lot of trust in the people that are caring for your children 6, 7, 8 hours a day. And I know that's a tremendous leap for a lot of people. And so, when you and I and others talk about the war on teachers, this is the idea of stealing their professional credibility away, taking the trust and fomenting distrust of educators to the degree that they can't even be in charge of their own profession anymore. And so we have to have outsiders come in and purport to tell them what to do. But there's sort of an underlying part of that, too, which is that if teachers don't have good professional judgment, if they don't have the professional expertise that they're in charge of and that they know better than outsiders, then what we can do is get the equivalent of high school graduates or shortly trained people into these classrooms that will work for very little money. We can churn and burn. They can work for a year or two, and then we can just replace them. So this idea of, Henry Ford's interchangeable parts, that we can just cycle teachers in and out as long as they follow the script. We get a warm body to keep every child safe reasonably, on a day-to-day basis, and that's okay. So this is all this part of this deprofessionalization of teachers that really has been going on for a long time. But personally, I see it heated up in the last decade or so.
Yeah, I've been saying for the longest time they're trying to make teaching factory work, where these little vessels known as children, you just open up their little heads and pour stuff in, and it's just stamping out little robots. And I think you're right; it's all about deprofessionalizing it. And you look at what Teach for America has done, which I think, look, I voted for President Obama twice, but I think Teach for America was a horrible thing.
Well, and that's the interesting thing. Right now I don't find that, educators really have friendly places to go. We look at Republicans and we look at some of the more right-wing and extremist views that are put out there today, and then we look at Democrats and we find that maybe they're a little bit more socially progressive. But on education, there's not a whole lot of difference. I mean, you look at more Republican moves within education. I know we can find some common ground in terms of the opposition to the Common Core standards. But, there's not a lot of common ground in terms of what we want to do afterwards or even why we're opposed to the Common Core. And so educators don't really have a good friend right now, someone they can support, someone that'll have their backs, because we find that a lot of these folks are cut from the same cloth. They're really two sides of the same coin in terms of taking the advice and counsel of private and corporate interests rather than the rank and file educators that actually do the daily work.
So last line of questioning I've got for you, where do we go with this? What as we see these attacks in Philadelphia and in New York, I keep saying, while they're happening in urban areas now, eventually this is the model that's going to sweep across all areas, and every community except the most affluent are going to be saddled with this corporate type education.
Absolutely. I mean, you've seen it going on in low-income communities of color for years because, yes, people were desperate. There were huge problems in inner city areas. I'm not going to deny that. There are still tremendous problems, especially in my city of Washington, D.C. The problem was they were sold a really lousy bill of goods. And now, once they've tapped these inner city markets, now you find that it's expanding out into the outlying areas. And the parents there are more politically and socially and culturally well-connected. Financially, they have better means. And so they can really push back on this. So you see, the Denver area, Denver Metropolitan Public Schools, a lot of the same inner city kind of private education reform. Then it started to expand it into the outlying counties like Jefferson County and Douglas County. And then you found that there was a lot of pushback from the more white, conservative, affluent parents. And they've actually made more headway in the last couple of years than some of these major persons of color and civil rights icons have made in decades to try to resist even something like segregation that we thought we had, dismantled after Brown v. Board. But you find that schools are more segregated now than they've been since then. So once this starts to filter out in these outlying areas, you're going to see more of that resistance, and you're going to see more progress made in those more affluent areas than we have seen in the inner cities.
Oh, that is the hope, because, you look at it, while it was in the poor areas and there was those people, that was all fine, well, and good. But coming to my precious little Johnny and Susie, we're going to put a stop to it. I think you're absolutely right. And the hope is that we return back to a teacher-based model, because I got to tell you, I trust the teachers. It's the administration and what's being imposed on them that I struggle with.
Right, absolutely. And we have to be fair to administrators that they have their own problems, they have their own pressures, and they have bosses and supervisors that are pushing things down upon them. So as teachers, we have to understand that we're sort of caught in the middle.
Yep.
We're all caught in the middle at school level between parents, between students, between administrators, and then their bosses and supervisors. So it really is a complicated mess, and we sort of have all our hands are in it. So.
I'd argue you're not in the middle. You're at the bottom, and as they say about rolling downhill, you're the one taking what and in full brunt.
Well, gosh, then you got to wonder, are the students even further down?
There's the other thought of that. Shaun, I appreciate you taking time for us. I appreciate your thoughts, and I'd love to talk to you again at some point in the near future as we continue this discussion.
No problem. Always here for you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Shaun Johnson. Again, if you want to take a look at what Shaun does over at The Chalkface, at thechalkface.com. Great program. Quick break, right back. Stick around.
Together, we can make America better. The Rick Smith Show.
From San Francisco, California, this is your World in 2 for Friday, October 10th, 2014. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service.
The Nobel Peace Prize for 2014 is to be awarded to Kailash Satyarthi and Malala Yousafzai for their struggle against suppression of young people and children.
Pakistan's Malala Yousafzai, only 17 years old, was shot by the Taliban for her outspoken advocacy for women's education. And the Indian activist Kailash Satyarthi, meanwhile, is renowned for his work to end child labor. In awarding the Peace Prize today, the committee said the pair have helped to advance the realization of the fraternity between nations, and they cited the fact that 60% of the developing world is under 25 years of age. Korea, it's been 5 weeks since Kim Jong-un has been seen in public, and his absence is fueling speculation that he's either fallen very ill or been deposed by the country's ruling elite. That speculation reached a fever pitch today when he failed to appear at a major political ceremony. State media says the ruler is suffering from foot and knee injuries sustained last month, but as time wears on, that explanation seems increasingly untenable. And in a very public showing of anti-Russian sentiment, soccer fans from Ukraine and Belarus joined in song last night at a Euro Cup qualifying match in Belarus. Their chant is an insult to Russian President Vladimir Putin, and it translates as Putin is a head. 8 Ukrainian fans were reportedly arrested for leading that song, but it didn't deter the rest of the crowd. Later in the match, fans sang the popular Ukrainian call and response that involves shouting glory to Ukraine, followed with glory to the heroes. Ukraine defeated Belarus 2-0. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
We need to show our children what our forefathers did before us, which was sit in and stand up for their rights. We weren't always granted our rights. We didn't always have schools for our children, and they're trying to take us back to that, and we have to fight back, because if we don't do anything, it'll be much worse.
Gotta find a way to hold them to account before they find a way to snuff our voices out. Can you hear us? Are you listening? No power without accountability.
I gotta be honest, the hope is, and I'm seeing reports coming out of Philadelphia that a number of actions going on around the city as students have taken to the streets the last couple of days to protest the SRC ripping up the teacher's contract and imposing their will and not negotiating. And to me, that's not something that I think you want kids to be learning from this process. I just don't think it is. I think it's a bad example set by the SRC. And for me, right now, if I were a parent in that district, I think I'd be calling for the SRC to be ripped up and kicked out of Dodge, which is why we've asked Kia Hinton. She's the chairperson with Action United, a parents group in the Philadelphia area, to come talk with us. Kia, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
So I look at this, and first, I can't imagine that this is something positive, that the school district that led by the SRC and Superintendent Height is a good lesson to be teaching kids.
I agree with you. This move that was made, it's trying to be framed by the district as being a good thing and helping our kids, but that's just how our opposition frames what they're doing, this attack on our teachers and as well as our students. And in my opinion, it's hurting instead of helping the situation.
Now, I always try and find something positive to look at in this. And for me, the reaction from the students, the protests, the organizing, the people coming together, something very positive, I think, coming out of this in that light.
Right. Well, I guess we could look at it that way. There are some positive things. We have community groups that are coming together and speaking out and, really making a big deal about what's happening, because it is. It's a huge deal about what's happening in our city.
You know, I've been saying for a while, and last year when they weren't sure if they'd be able to open up, and there was all this talk that they didn't have money, and last year we found out they didn't have nurses in schools. 2 children died, I believe, because of it. You didn't have guidance counselors, or you didn't have the basic needs to open the schools. I said, as a parent in that district, if I lived there, I don't know that I'd be sending my kid. And I think a massive district-wide general strike should have happened. Is there any talk of mobilizing something like that in this instance?
Well, you know, from what I've heard, you know, people aren't too certain if they have the ability to strike. But as a parent who has children in the Philadelphia public school system, I totally support a strike. I think what's happening to our teachers and to our public school system is atrocious. And there has to be some pushback.
Right.
And so I totally support a strike.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about the teachers. The teachers are going to do what they're going to do. I'm talking about the parents saying, look, you can't provide my kid a safe place. Because look, you know, last year we talked about the two kids who went to school, and at the end of the day, whatever ailment they had killed them, and there was no nurse there. I got to be honest, as a parent, I don't know that I want to send my kids into a school that's not safe.
Well, you know, I think that what we're seeing is we see a lot of this stuff happening in communities, primarily of color. And I think that we've seen just over the years the deterioration of our schools and the services that are provided. And so I think what happens is families become accustomed to what the situations are. And so it's almost like things as usual, you know. And then I think in a lot of instances, you know, communities and people of color have lost their voice and, you know, really don't understand how to fight back, and maybe just don't even understand the attack that's being played on families and communities.
That's an excellent point. And I look at this as just this is a symptom of what's going on in Philadelphia and in the York City School District and in other urban areas. Is just a symptom of the disease, which is this idea that we're going to systematically defund public education. And I look at our governor, who for his 3.5-year tenure has taken, in my view, about $3 billion out of education over his time. And honestly, it has disproportionately affected places like Philadelphia and the York City School District.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I agree with you, and it's a systematic attack on public education, and not just public education, but just working and poor families. It's an attack on working and poor families.
Right. So what are you seeing on the ground? You're in Philadelphia. You're obviously one of the parents there. What are you seeing from the students? The reports that I'm seeing, overwhelmingly positive that these kids have taken to the streets. What are you seeing?
I mean, so I'm a part of a coalition that's made up of students, and the students have been right there all along with us when we support them. And so they speak up. They know that what's happening to their education isn't right. And so, you know, it makes you feel good when you see the young people taking charge of their education and hitting the streets and making their voices heard and fighting back.
Do you think they understand that, you know, the fight that they may be fighting today may be the one that they're saving themselves from tomorrow? Because I got to assume some of those kids are going to go on to want to become teachers and come back to their school district and maybe teach at the school they went to. So the fight that they're engaging in today may be the one that helps them tomorrow.
I believe so. I think so. You know, I think that everything that we're doing, especially with the young people, is really important just in future endeavors. You know, we're creating a group who will essentially grow up, become adults, working adults, and will need to lead the charge in fighting for public education and just fighting for their rights, just overall.
Now, you know, and we talk an awful lot about charters, and Philadelphia has been one of the cities that have been the charter schools, however you want to categorize them, non-for-profit, for-profit, whichever they are, there's still money leaving the classroom going to profit interests. Do you see this as something that has hampered public education in the Philadelphia area?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that charters are really a double-edged sword. I think that for some families who are part of a particular socioeconomic groups have been able to utilize charter schools, and charter schools have utilized their position where they are not, they don't have much oversight in order to have certain students in their schools, and it helps them to appear that they're doing better. But, based on the research that I've seen and it's been presented, that charters essentially aren't doing that much better than our traditional public schools. So it's really just sort of like a bait and switch.
Yeah.
Is that what I like to call it?
No, I perfectly understand. In fact, the studies that I've read show the vast majority of them do the same or worse, and there's a handful that do much better. And when you look at the ones that are doing better, they follow the small class size, higher funding levels, more teacher-student interaction, all of the things that I think any rational person would say that's how education should be. That's what they're following. So as we look at this, Kia, well, I guess we've lost Kia. I'm sitting there talking to myself. Somehow the line must have dropped. But I look at this and I'm encouraged by what we've seen in the Philadelphia area as the students are coming to the streets. I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that they begin to be empowered and push back. And she made an interesting point that maybe the communities have they don't know how to gain their voice. And maybe this is one of those first steps into the how. And the reason I think it's important that we talk about what's going on there is because understand, this is just the beginning. This is the place where this starts. I've been calling Philadelphia the Petri dish for a reason. This is where the disease, this is where the cancer, this is where the illness, if you will, is perfected. So I got to be honest, there's interesting things that we've got to do, but we'll see where it takes us. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Rick Smith Show, changing America for the better.
It is believed that a little hard work is good for the soul. If this is true, then the history of child workers in the United States is a soulful tale. The first child laborers landed in Virginia in the year 1619. These immigrant children found slave working conditions and poverty wages in their new world. As the years passed, little changed. The average child worker toiled 16 to 18 hours per day, 6 days a week in factories and textile mills. Education was a luxury, and many believed a loss on working children. Charles Harding, president of the Merchants Woolen Company, stated, "There is such a thing as too much education for working people sometimes. I have seen cases where young people are spoiled for labor by too much refinement." Labor unions, consumer groups, and parent coalitions all work to shorten hours, ease conditions, and ultimately end exploitive child abuses. Baby strikes in Paterson, New Jersey, and Allentown, Pennsylvania, demanding 11 and 12-hour workdays were fought vehemently by mill and factory owners. The Pennsylvania legislature was the first to consider prohibiting child workers in 1833, and consider is all Pennsylvania did until July of 1903, when Mother Jones led the March of the Mill Children from Philadelphia to Oyster Bay, New York, in an attempt to influence President Theodore Roosevelt. In 1836, Massachusetts was the first state to pass a law restricting the use of children in manufacturing. And 102 years later, the United States Supreme Court ruled the Walsh-Healy Act restricting the use of child labor as constitutional. Also in 1938, Congress passed the Fair Labor Standards Act, which put more stringent restrictions on the use of child labor. While hard work teaches discipline, self-reliance, and responsibility, the exploitive nature of our past must remind us that what we have today, we mustn't take for granted, for the days of tomorrow are doomed to repeat if we ignore those lessons hard learned. This Rick Smith Show Labor History Moment was made possible by a grant from the Labor Education Center at IUP. For more information, visit www.thericksmithshow.com.
That's why I started giving these speeches. My job is not only commander-in-chief, but educator-in-chief. And I needed to say to the people, you bet it's tough.
sunrise. Put your hands in to the big sky. You can touch the sunrise. Feel a new day.
Yeah, educator in chief. Yeah. I go back and I think about that whole No Child's Dime Left Behind. And I said at the time when they passed it, it was going to be a massive ripoff and the beginning of the end of public education. And guess what? It has been. And all of the things that we predicted, all of the tragedy we knew, well, here it is. And what's sad about it is, Teddy Kennedy put his name on it and really pushed for it. And I got to think that he didn't envision this turning into what it has become, which has been really just an absolute, in my view, just a criminal enterprise, if you will. Just sad stuff. Anyway, here to talk a little bit about what's going on. I've asked Timothy Slekar. He is a educator, education activist, and also a blogger, bustedpencils.blogspot.com, the website. Also a new radio program coming out. Tim, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick. Hey, you got to love my man, the educator, President Bush, making sure that Americans know what they're talking about.
But what's frustrating to me is I know people who actually believe that rhetoric, that he really cared. It was really about, and maybe he did. I mean, maybe personally he did, but his policies were horrible.
You know what? I've had this conversation with a few people around here lately, principals. Just for the listener there, I'm also the dean of the School of Education at a small college in Wisconsin, and Madison, Wisconsin, Edgewood. And so I work with a lot of principals, and I constantly hear look, No Child Left Behind. It in practice was really bad, but the idea behind it was to shine this light on this glaring, kind of problem where students, particularly minority students and low-income students, are not getting the education they deserve. And then I would always ask them. I said, "Did you not know that before No Child Left Behind?" And every one of them, will say, "Yeah, we knew that." I said, "Then why did we need a disastrous education law to shine the light on something you already knew was happening?"
Yeah.
And so for me, I come back to, and I say, look, this is the conspiratorial part where people get a little bit, Tim, I'm not sure. Maybe you better check your medications. But Bush and reformers and people like this. Now, whether Kennedy knew or not, I'm not sure. But other people knew that this was a strike at dismantling the public education system in this country. This was absolutely planned because people knew the end result was going to show that public schools were not measuring up. And those of us in the beginning, like you, said, look, this is a disaster. Our group said this is a disaster because it's absolutely going to show that public schools are going to fail because it set this 100% bar that no one was ever going to make.
Yeah, I mean, I said from the beginning, you could walk down the street on a beautiful sunny day with blue sky and ask 100 people what color the sky is, and you're not going to get 100 people to agree that it's a beautiful blue sky sunny day.
Right. And so that was the issue. And so, when people talk about ed reform, I look at this, and so, being in Pennsylvania, being a Pennsylvania native, actually having grown up in York and seeing, the attempted takeover by York schools by the charter business, looking at Philadelphia essentially throwing its hands in the air and saying, we're done with public education. And people are saying, where's this coming from? It's like, well, this is the result of, actually 30 years of a planned attack on our public education system, because this idea that, that you who have nothing and maybe your neighbor who has something should then go to school and be given equal access, which again, even equal access is actually not really what we should be striving for. We should be striving for equity. But people, some people have a tough time with public. At least for me, I would rather debate hardcore libertarians that come out and say, look, I'm against the whole idea of public anything. It's when I start to debate, for me, neoliberal Democrats, the kind of Democrats for education reform, and then the hardcore conservative Republicans who say, that education is this local thing. And I'm sitting there saying, none of you really truly have any sense of public education and what it's supposed to do and how it's supposed to work in a democracy, and the fact that if we lose this one institution, again, not the best institution, had lots of failures. In fact, it has not served poor and minority kids well over the time that it's been put forward. However, no one has put forward a better idea, and I don't think they ever will, because the idea that we're all responsible for making sure that the society that the children who live in the society that we grow up in are literate, functionally, civically, critically active. That is something public education has to do. We cannot turn that over to Charter Company X, Charter Company B, because Charter Company X and Charter Company B are just going to be in it to make sure that they provide the minimals and make sure they make money off the taxpayer.
Yeah, minimal money out, maximum money in. That's business, and I don't know that in things that I consider the commons should we be having that model. And there are a number of things that I don't think should be in the hands of profiteers. And I think you're spot on with this idea that there are those who just don't believe that anything should be in the hands of we the people. Nothing should be public. Everything should be with a profit motive attached to it.
Right, and you know, and I said I at least have a little bit more you know, respect or empathy when people come out and say, I used to work with a guy when I was at Penn State, you know, who would say, you know, I think public schools and public anything is a robbery, you know, it's stealing my tax dollars. I'm like, you know, at least I know where this person's coming from. But when people say, you know, when we come out and say, well, the public needs to be fixed, we need these private public partnerships, or we need these you know, for school districts, we need these ex-military or ex-businessmen to come in and run them because they know how to, you know, make things work in the private sector. And you're sitting there going, wait, the public school system was never meant to be the private sector. The common goods was never meant to be the private sector. Why would we imagine that they would be good at running a common public school system when the idea that they've always grown, you know, what they've made their mark on is private sector, you know, and let's be honest, it's been private sector profit. And the idea that schools are profit centers is you know, is silly at best. I mean, we have to look at education, public schools, and we have to look at them and saying, like, this is where the future, the critical future of the next generation is going to get the, you know, the education that will or will not help continue the country growing in a humane way. And so this is the other part of the public education spectrum where I see people say, but Tim, you know, we have to make sure that students are prepared for work.
That's where
right, you know, right? And so I always ask people and say, okay, I'm good with that. And this is where I'll even have some arguments with some people who typically say they're pro-public school, but the schools need to be fixed because they're not preparing kids for jobs. And I say, what's your evidence that they're not preparing kids for jobs? And they say, well, we listen to the people who own businesses and they say they can't find people. And I said, but these are the same businesses that lay people off by the thousands. I said, so there's no lack, you know, the idea that getting a great education then creates a job is mythology.
Right.
And so think about that, right? You know, okay, I just graduated from college. In fact, we're finding this out now. More students are going to college. More students are graduating. And more students are now slaves to student debt because the ability to work for a wage that will actually pay down the debt they incurred to get an education is not there. So this, again, people, we need to, you know, we need to rebuild the commons, rebuild the public schools so that these places are places where students, teachers, everybody can get critical about what it is we as a society need to do to make sure that people don't have these situations. You know, poverty, let's talk about poverty. Let's talk about its influence on education. Let's talk about the fact that money in politics buys you access to things that you and I, Rick, don't have access to. That's a public school system. People say, well, we don't want our kids indoctrinated. No, what you're saying is that you don't want kids learning about what's really happening in their world, and you don't want them making a difference. Well, you know what? Public schools are there to make a difference.
I'm right there with you. And you're going back to the jobs thing because it was one of the lists that I have on my questions. We've been sold this idea that the only reason we're sending kids to school is that they can get a job. And I'm of the mindset that I want problem-solving, critical thinking citizens who then can take on a job and learn something new. And that's how they'll support themselves. Not that we're going to just stamp out little robot workers, or do I have something backward here?
No, I mean you're saying exactly what the public school system should be, and what early progressives said the public system was designed to be. Is it okay? Yeah. Hopefully you're literate and functional, and you're able to fill out a job application, and you're able to get a job. But the purpose of we the people putting money into a public system of education is not to prepare our students to be the products or the byproducts, or to be used up by corporations until they're not good anymore and then spit back out, and then we have to retrain them for the next job. Public school, the idea of education, this is the problem, is that people mess up schooling and education. We need to educate children. Public schooling is about education, opening their minds to the possibilities so that they are, like you, I like the way you said it, we need critical thinking, problem solving, community-oriented people that understand that working together and building a better, just, compassionate world is the function of your life as a human. The function of your life as a human is not to work for the man.
Yeah, but if we push that, then the tax code we have, the mass inequality we have, all of the things that we're saddled with now that benefit the handful couldn't exist if we had the world that you're talking about.
Well, I'm sorry, but I'm just going to go back. I'm just asking for a world that's particularly some of our incredibly, biblically, deep religiously seated conservative Republicans tend to want to throw at us. I'm asking for that world, because that's the world that's in the Bible that they read, which is the same Bible that I read, that says that that's our function. Our function is not to create wealth for a few people and the rest of us be used up by it. So, throw this back and saying, I don't understand why this isn't at the top of anybody's list who considers themselves, somewhat either spiritual or religious or committed to social justice and doing what's best for people. Because if that's where you were coming from, if you said, look, I'm a believer in some type of justice system that's above man, well then that's got to be a system that says freedom and critical thinking is absolutely the most essential things we must provide people. The ability, and this, I was thinking about this, if you talk about Colorado and you say, we look at Philadelphia as about to essentially shut down the public schools. What we're saying now too, and in New York, we're gonna sell the schools. What we're saying is we're selling the ability to learn, and nothing is more criminal than restricting the access to learning for anybody. Yep. The idea, think about that through history. How many times, anytime we see any mass, destructive type of personality take over some type of country, some type of world, some type of sect, even some type of cult, the issue is the first thing they do is restrict information, restrict access to learning. Anytime I see a restriction that takes learning and moves it to the side and puts forward, like what we have right now, job training as opposed to learning, I'm telling you that you're going down the wrong path.
No, I'm with you. And the reality is, and I tell my kids this all the time, I care that you know how to learn. I took calculus in high school. If I had to actually figure out a problem now, if you put something in front of me right now, it would look like hieroglyphics. I barely know how to do my daughter's 7th grade math, but I did know how to do it. I did know I learned how to do it. And that to me is what's important, that process of being able to learn and being confident enough that you can learn new things.
Well, in fact, you said that even before this, and we talk about this now too. When I actually talk to true employers who sit there and say, look, we really don't have any job openings. However, if we could hire somebody, who we need to hire is the person who's able to learn. We want a problem-solving, critical thinking person who knows how to work with group dynamics, that is able to learn. That's the number one job requisite for somebody, who wants to get a good job. So even if we're talking about jobs, when you get down and dirty with the employer, that's what they're looking for. They're looking
but that's
for
not the message. That's
no,
not the message.
Of course that's not the of course that's not the message, because that's not the message because that message doesn't support the idea of a public school system that has as its function to create, literate, critical citizens capable of thought, capable of learning, capable of group work. Okay, that doesn't support that narrative. But, so that's where I also come back at the business world and say to some of them and go, look, the reality is that if you think you're going to continue, I talked to Henry Rollins, and if you're not sure, Henry Rollins, sure. Black Flag, talked to him once, and he said, my problem I have with people who say we want, our education system is that if we wanted the world's best businesses and we wanted the world's best military, why in the hell are we not making the world's best education system? And, okay, so from Henry Rollins' point of view, he's like, so instead, though, we're making an education system on the cheap. And even if you believe, though, that education was to create the best businesses and to have America dominate the world, well, then we're not really doing that, because, we're defunding public education. We're defunding students who live in poverty, the ability for their programs to help them go forward. We're doing everything we can to hurt students' education. So Rollins is sitting there saying, don't tell me that you're worried about America's fortune and about America's ability to produce in the world economy if you're not willing to invest in America's education system.
Well, let me ask you about that, because, I would argue there are certain districts where we do. I mean, you look at the Philadelphia area. The per pupil spending in Philadelphia, as I understand it, is around $7,000 per student. You go to one of the wealthier suburbs just north of Philadelphia, the per pupil spending is in the $20,000 range. So I would argue there are areas that are doing what you're saying. They're investing the money so that they do have the best educated students. It just hasn't filtered down to everyone else.
Well, it hasn't filtered down to everyone else, and I mean that is a good point. We know that, and that's what earlier I said about equality and equity. I mean, the biggest issue that we have in public education is not really equality; it's equity, and that's perfectly the example you give in Philadelphia. Per pupil funding, wherever you do that, do comparisons. But somebody says, well, Philadelphia doesn't have the tax base, and so that's what they can afford. And you say, but that's not the promise of the American public education system as stated in the Pennsylvania State Constitution. The State Constitution of Pennsylvania doesn't say you will have a public education that is worth the ability of your neighbors to pay taxes. It says that every student in Pennsylvania will get the best education they can possibly give, which would mean then you'd start to say issues of equity matter. In fact, you might even start to look at and go, students getting $20,000 a year might not need $20,000 a year to be educated, and students who are getting $7,000 a year might need $15,000 a year to educate, because it's about equity. It's not equality. And if we really want to address public schools, that's the other fear that I think people have, though, why we're looking at shutting down public schools, is that public schools constantly, although they're never successful, but they're constantly arguing about, and not arguing, but putting forth the argument that equity matters. And boy, that's a strong argument, and that frightens people, because if you start really imagining equity, think about what you just said, Rick. 20,000 versus 7,000, we'd have to go in and renegotiate that.
Yeah, and what's interesting is the reason I think it's so important that people hear and understand that is it's not going to just stop in places like Philadelphia or York. Eventually, it goes across all working class neighborhoods, and it could be white faces like mine as well.
Oh, and we're already seeing that. In fact, where you see some of the pushback in some of the suburbs and some of the, the cities, Douglas County, Colorado, Jefferson County, Colorado, here in Wisconsin, some of the white suburbs that are saying, wait, now we're starting to see, access to, so I can speak here in Wisconsin, things that used to be access to music, access to drama, access, all these things now are becoming what we would say is like a pay to play type of thing, where they used to be public school things. And people are saying, well, what do you mean? We've already paid our taxes. And the schools are saying, well, we have to put together and let's go back to No Child Left Behind and reform movement. The implementing the reform movement, which is nothing but standards, curriculum, tests, and punishments. That's expensive, and people don't realize how expensive it is to implement standards, curriculum, tests, and punishments, to the point, though, that even suburban schools are saying, "Oh, we need more money to get ready to test kids so that we can punish these kids or punish these teachers or punish these schools." And we don't have enough money to pay for the orchestra anymore because we got to buy tests from Pearson.
Yeah, and I talk about that often because personally, I would have never finished high school had it not been for athletics. Given the point in my life where I was, had it not been for the draw of athletics, I would have never finished high school, let alone gone on for a master's degree.
Well, and again, we go back to the fundamentals of what is a good public education. A good public education is not career training. It's actually a great education in the arts, in the physical sciences, in physical education. Wherever it is, every student should have the ability to thrive somewhere where they're best. And so you say, without sports, I wouldn't have done it for me. I know students that say, without the art classes I took, it wouldn't have done it for me. Without the ability to play in the orchestra, it wouldn't have done it with me. So when we start reducing that in the public school system and say, look, the public school system is about job preparation, is about learning to read, about learning to do math, and anything else extra, is going to cost you, we're essentially taking and stripping away what it means to educate people, and we're just providing them minimal schooling so that they can go out and be cogs in the financial wheel and that they'll eventually be discarded.
That's an interesting point. So when you look at this, when you look at what's going on in Philadelphia, and as I've been saying, this is just the symptom of the overall disease, which is systematically dismantling and defunding public education. When you look at the acts of the SRC to basically tell the teachers, the agreement we had with you, we're going to rip up and we're going to impose our will on you. One, I can't imagine what that does for morale, but two, what lesson does that send to the kids that these people teach?
Well, I would actually, and this is where, as an old social studies teacher, and I would come back and go, here's a great lesson, kids. I'm going to teach you a lesson in the fact of here's the 1% taking advantage of the rest of us, and what should we be doing about this? Because at some point, and we see students taking to the streets in peaceful protests, and that's great. At what point, though, are people going to recognize that they're being taken and kind of bowled over and say, keep going beyond this. But again, you got to give the props to the Philadelphia students for recognizing that there's an issue and going to the streets and saying, stop this. But we need to be talking about the fact that, wait a minute, you made a promise to us and now you're not going to honor it. But yet somehow, the people that defunded our economic system in 2006, 2007, 2008, these guys are living, with $350 million, golden parachutes. Like, wait a minute, what's the problem here? We're telling teachers who are going to get a retirement of maybe $50,000 a year, we can't meet that obligation anymore.
And
really?
What they've done is they've retroactively gone back and taken healthcare benefits from retirees that were negotiated over years and years, and deferred wages paid based on the fact that when these teachers retire, they're going to have that little bit of benefit. They've actually ripped that away as well. And again, it comes back down to a governor who has taken more than $3 billion away from public education in this state.
Corbett's taken more than $3 billion from the public schools, and at the same time has created the ability. And this is the part that when people say we just can't afford it, these are times of austerity. No, these are created times of shortage. These times of austerity were put upon us by people who are in power. If, for example, in Pennsylvania, if we just simply taxed, enforced, in fact, collected the taxes that companies were supposed to pay, and or if we went at the fracking business and in fact go after it for all the environmental issues that it is, but it's going on right now, and we're not in Pennsylvania, you're not collecting a dime out of that. That's criminal right there. And so to say we can't afford this is lying to the people, because there's plenty of money out there. It's just not being collected from the people who owe it. Yep. But it is being collected from you and me.
Yeah, I mean, we're the one paying the freight, and my kids, through lower opportunities in the future, they're paying for it as well. And as you said, the Delaware loophole that allows 3/4 of the companies in the Commonwealth to pay zero taxes, even though the Republicans love to say Pennsylvania has the highest tax rate in the free world, except 3/4 of the people don't pay anything.
Yeah, it's one thing to say that you have the highest thing, but if you actually don't enforce it, nobody pays it, then who the hell cares?
Yeah, it's amazing, and what we've allowed to happen, which is why I think November 4th is so very important. Tim, I appreciate the thoughts, the input. I'm looking forward to the Busted Pencils program. When's that coming on?
We should have the first show we're looking at in 3 weeks. It'll be available on podcast, and what you're going to want to do is just simply go to bustedpencils.com and be ready and look for a little, I'll give you a little hint there. We've got, Goodwill Hunting there might make a special appearance.
All righty, good stuff. Tim Slekar, I appreciate you taking time for us. I look forward to talking to you again at some point in the very near future. Thanks so much.
All right, Rick. Thanks a lot, man.
Always great. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
In the capital, are fighting till the end. And we're not gonna break tonight, and we're not gonna bend. Some say the union's down, but I asked around, and everybody said, this is a union town, all down the line. This is a union town, all down the line. And if they come to strip our rights away, we'll give them hell every time. This is a union town, all down the line.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, is calling for more extensive health screenings of passengers traveling from areas affected by the Ebola outbreak. The union represents 60,000 flight attendants at 19 airlines. The flight attendants say the globalization of air travel and today's aviation industry requires new, stronger measures to protect passengers and crews. A report from the New York Committee for Occupational Safety and Health. You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, is calling for more extensive health screenings of passengers traveling from areas affected by the Ebola outbreak. The union represents 60,000 flight attendants at 19 airlines. The flight attendants say the globalization of air travel and today's aviation industry requires new, stronger measures to protect passengers and crews. A report from the New York Committee for Occupational Safety and Health, NICOSH, shows 8,600 air hazards to passengers. The hazards include exposure to biohazards like bodily fluids, as well as unlabeled chemical cleaners, diesel emissions, ear-splitting noise, and temperature extremes. The workers most often work for subcontractors who fail to provide them with adequate protective gear and training. NICOSH's Charlene Oberauer says these hazards are preventable.
We really found that there were significant hazards and risks to workers' safety, and that many of these safety health hazards that workers face are also hazards that passengers who frequent airports may also be exposed to. A lot of the hazards that are listed here in this report could easily be mitigated, and most of them are actually preventable and would be very small fixes for the employer to address.
The labor union, 32BJ SEIU, plans to hold infectious disease training sessions for New York airport workers next week. Chicago fast food workers are going to Ferguson, Missouri this weekend for Ferguson October, a weekend of resistance. It's 4 days of actions demanding justice for Mike Brown, the unarmed black teenager shot to death by Ferguson police, and to also demand an end to violent policing nationwide. Among many sponsoring organizations are the St. Louis NAACP, Domestic Workers Alliance, Code Pink, and SEIU healthcare workers from Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, and Kansas. 8 New York car wash workers have filed suit against Vegas Auto Spa, claiming more than $600,000 in back wages are owed by the company. The employer's total liability could exceed $1 million. Workers claimed there were overtime and other violations. They say this demonstrates the need for passage of the Car Wash Accountability Act in New York City, which is currently before the City Council. It would require companies to be licensed and to put up surety bonds to cover substantiated claims of wage theft. The nonpartisan Congressional Government Accountability Office has released a study showing that voter turnout in 2 states dropped after they enacted photo voter ID laws. GAO says it compared turnout in Kansas and in Tennessee to turnout in 4 comparison states that had no changes in their voter ID laws from the 2008 to the 2012 general elections. GAO says its study suggests that turnout decreased in Kansas and in Tennessee more than in the selected comparison states of Alabama, Arkansas, Delaware, and Maine. Kansas turnout declined by an estimated 1.9 to 2.2 percentage points, and in Tennessee, voter turnout dropped by 2.2 to 3.2%. The decline was higher among young voters and among African Americans. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Monday morning feels so bad. Everybody seems to nag me. Coming Tuesday, I feel better. Even my old man looks good. This Wednesday's go so slow. Thursday, I don't know. I got
And welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something in your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Hillary Clinton in town last night doing the circuit for Tom Wolf, hopefully the next governor here in Pennsylvania, and hitting on the themes that I think are important, getting back to that solidly working class kind of mentality, talking about minimum wage, talking about family leave, talking about, I think, the things finally that we've been talking about on this program for some time, which is why I think we need to be pushing these politicians and pushing hard. Well, anyway, it is Friday. It is our Future Friday, which means our good friends over at the Campaign for America's Future on the program. That's why I've got Isaiah Poole. He's the online editor over there at the Campaign for America's Future, ourfuture.org. Going to talk to us about the upcoming big gala ball that they're putting on. Isaiah, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you. And by the way, happy minimum wage day.
There you go.
It's 10.10, so we got to fight for 10.10 an hour.
There you go. And I would argue it should be higher than that.
So would I.
So I understand you guys are having a big gala event next week to recognize a couple of folks for their work in helping working families.
Absolutely. On Tuesday at Arena Stage in Washington, D.C., we're giving awards to 3 people. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, the president of AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, that's Lee Saunders, and a woman named Saru Jayaraman, who is running an organization called the Restaurant Opportunities Center United.
Or just Rock United.
Rock United. And for those of your listeners who don't know, Rock United is a very fascinating organization, and they have been organizing restaurant workers around the country to raise their wages and to get rid of the tip minimum wage. The tip minimum wage, which is the federal level, only $2.13 an hour.
Which I got to tell you is just criminal. I mean, this day and age, when you can get away with paying someone just over $2 an hour, just absolutely criminal.
Well, and think about this. I a few weeks ago, I talked to a woman who works at a restaurant near my house. She's a college student, and she's making she gets that $2.13 an hour tip wage, and she's working at a restaurant that is sort of your typical, sort of like an Applebee's or, Fridays or things like that. The food is not that expensive. People who come there don't have a huge amount of money, and they don't make big tips. So imagine you're working at a restaurant. Your employer only gives you $2.13 for each hour that you work, and the rest of it you got to make up in tips. And even if the law says that if you don't make it up in tips, you've got to match the difference between the $2.13 and what you make in tips and what the main minimum wage is in your area. That often does not happen. sometimes employers don't even bother to tell the workers that that's their obligation.
Right.
They just tell them, come in, we'll pay you $2.13 an hour, and the rest you got to make up in tips. And if you don't get any tips, tough
on you. And my ex-wife worked as a waitress when we were in college, and oddly enough, it was $2.13 an hour. It was like $2 an hour back then. And I remember, she never got a paycheck. And you say, well, you get $2.13 an hour. They never see any money in a paycheck because all of that $2.13 an hour goes just to pay your taxes. Because what they do, and I'm sure you know this, what they do is they take 8% of the total of your checks. So if someone goes in there and spends, $100, they take 8% of that for tax purposes because they assume you're at least getting that, and then you get to live on that whatever additional is. And sadly, most people, and fortunately now in the day of social internet, we're starting to see cheapskates out there who on $100 or $200 check are leaving $3 or $4, which doesn't even cover the taxes. I think now is the time to start bringing awareness, as you've pointed out.
Well, that's why we gave Sarut Yaraman our Paul Wellstone Citizen Leadership Award, because our organization started fighting for restaurant workers who were displaced by the World Trade Center attacks, the Windows of the World restaurant that had fallen with the Twin Towers. And a lot of those workers were displaced and were unable to find work afterwards. I mean, they were actively discriminated against. And she organized these workers, basically shamed some of the employers into hiring some of them, and then had them fight to make sure that they got decent wages, that at least the restaurants were complying with the law. And then, of course, she has fought since then to actually change the law.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's happening in New York, which is very interesting to me, is that New York, the Wage Bureau in the state of New York, is now holding hearings on whether to eliminate the tipped minimum wage in that state. It no longer exists in about 8 states, including California, Oregon, and Washington. And if New York becomes the 9th state that eliminates the tipped minimum wage, you know how huge that is.
Absolutely.
The restaurant industry in New York City and throughout the state.
Well, I look at this.
So I think it's what she's doing is really tremendously important.
Yeah, and we've had her on the program a couple of times over the years, and she's a fascinating individual and well deserving of your award. But and to kind of just wrap this up, you look at this whole tip idea, and to me, I got to be honest, a situation where housekeepers or waiters and waitresses or any of these folks who do really hard, difficult work, depending on people's generosity, especially in times of economic downturn, are just a recipe for disaster for the low-wage worker. And for me, I think it's got to be one of these scenarios where you don't give these exemptions for tips. We lose this idea. You just pay people a decent wage.
You pay people a decent wage. And frankly, I would rather pay, if I'm getting a room for $99 a night, let's say a hotel room for $99 a night, there was this campaign by Marriott which says that you got to, think about the people you're paying and who are making a bed and so forth and give them a tip. Well, listen, I would be more than happy to pay an extra $2 or $3 or $4 or $5 a night for my room, to make sure that the women and men who are cleaning that room and are making up my bed are able to then go to have decent beds of their own and decent meals of their own.
Yep.
Rather than to say, okay, we're going to take your $99 or whatever it is my room fee is. I'm going to put that in my pocket, and if you want the worker to eat, then you got to shell out more. That's not right.
I'm with you. I think it's about time, and hopefully by bringing these issues up, we bring it to the forefront. And with elections coming around, it's important to push these politicians in that direction. Let's move along to a politician. I see one of the other folks that you're honoring is Mayor Bill de Blasio. Why?
Bill de Blasio has won an election in the city of New York, which, even though it's a progressive city, was run under two successive Republican administrations, Giuliani and then Michael Bloomberg, who switched from Republican to independent, but still had something of a conservative governance philosophy.
He's a corporatist.
Corporatist, exactly. And de Blasio ran a campaign as an unapologetic progressive populist. Said that, listen, New York is really two cities, one for poor and working class people and one for the wealthy. And we're going to have to focus our resources on lifting up the poor and the working class people. And the wealthy are going to have to share some of the responsibility of paying for that. No more free lunches for the wealthy and taking lunches away from the poor. And he won that election. And since that, he's been fighting for universal daycare, which he has won. He's gone up against the charter school, private charter school industry there in the city, and got into a fight with the state's governor over that. He is pushing for affordable housing. He most recently has begun to ratchet back on some of those odious workfare laws that were imposed really came out of the Clinton era, where people under the guise of welfare reform were literally forced to provide free labor to the city, and in ways that deprived them of opportunities to get the kind of education opportunities, for example, that they wanted to engage in so that they could get decent jobs. So he's begun to ratchet some of that back, make some of those welfare requirements more reasonable. And for all of those things, we've said, we want to say, de Blasio, we recognize your progressive leadership. We want to encourage you to do more of it. And we want to show other politicians that they can win when they run on that type of an agenda.
And the hope is that message gets out. And look, I'm looking for big things out of the New York City mayor, and I'm hoping that sends the message across the country. And finally, Lee Saunders, you're recognizing the president of AFSCME. Tell me why.
Lee Saunders has made it his business to make absolutely sure that the attack on workers from the right-wing governors around the state is stopped. He's taken on Scott Walker, for example, directly. Scott Walker, as everyone knows, was the governor of Wisconsin that came in with an agenda to deprive public workers of bargaining rights. And he rolled up his sleeves, went to Wisconsin, when the Republican governor in Ohio tried to impose a similar agenda of weakening protections for government workers. They put that on a referendum. Saunders and the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees was actually able to beat that referendum back in Ohio. He is also a great coalition builder. And one of the things that we are recognizing him for is the fact that he's not just fighting for public sector workers, but he's fighting for all workers. And he's worked very closely with us at the Campaign for America's Future and some other organizations to push for a higher minimum wage, to push for better health care benefits, all of the changes that we need to make in the economy to make it better for working people.
Well, I mean, it sounds like steps in the right direction, and the hope is that by you guys, patting these folks on the back, they continue to push the agenda forward and bring the rest of us along as well, by using their organizations and their offices to push this. The hope is that the message gets out and we move forward, Isaiah.
Well, that's exactly right, and these are three names to watch. All three of these people have an excellent track record, and they're all people that I would just sort of keep an eye on. As you know, De Blasio has a tough road ahead, and he's got to make some tough political choices. I know he gets a little bit of heat some heat in New York because he supported in the Democratic primary up there. He supported Cuomo, even though Cuomo has done a lot of things which I think have been distasteful to progressives, particularly people who are very concerned about government reform. So there are some tough choices he made. He's not a perfect guy, but we love the direction he's going in. He's a man to watch. So is Sanders. So is Saroj Jayaraman, who I just love for her work on behalf of low-wage workers.
There you go. Well, I look forward to it, and I look forward to the gala. And Isaiah, it's always great talking with you. I appreciate you taking time for us.
All right.
All righty. Our good friend Isaiah Poole, Campaign for America's Future, ourfuture.org, the website. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
This is the fading American dream. I got the time now to glorify now. Before a second shot, don't want to go for. I'm just searching for my dignity. This is a fading American dream. This is a fading American dream. This is a fading American dream.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
From San Francisco, California, this is your World in 2 for Friday, October 10th, 2014. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service.
The Nobel Peace Prize for 2014 is to be awarded to Kailash Satyarthi and Malala Yousafzai for their struggle against suppression of young people and children.
Pakistan's Malala Yousafzai, only 17 years old, was shot by the Taliban for her outspoken advocacy for women's education. And the Indian activist Kailash Satyarthi, meanwhile, is renowned for his work to end child labor. In awarding the Peace Prize today, the committee said the pair have helped to advance the realization of the fraternity between nations, and they cited the fact that 60% of the developing world is under 25 years of age. Heading to North Korea, it's been 5 weeks since Kim Jong-un has been seen in public, and his absence is fueling speculation that he's either fallen very ill or been deposed by the country's ruling elite. That speculation reached a fever pitch today when he failed to appear at a major political ceremony. State media says the ruler is suffering from foot and knee injuries sustained last month, but as time wears on, that explanation seems increasingly untenable. And in a very public showing of anti-Russian sentiment, soccer fans from Ukraine and Belarus joined in song last night at a Euro Cup qualifying match in Belarus. Their chant is an insult to Russian President Vladimir Putin, and it translates as Putin is a dickhead. 8 Ukrainian fans were reportedly arrested for leading that song, but it didn't deter the rest of the crowd. Later in the match, fans sang the popular Ukrainian call and response that involves shouting glory to Ukraine, followed with glory to the heroes. Ukraine defeated Belarus 2-0. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been discussing the uneasy alliance of the American colonies before our Constitution was implemented. When the war ended, the Articles of Confederation were inadequate. Revolutionary soldiers who received notes for their service had nowhere to collect, and developers had no way to legally protect holdings. So colonial leaders convened to produce a radically different document that is now our Constitution. In April of 1789, 35 years after Ben Franklin's Albany Convention, George Washington placed his hand on a Bible and took his oath of office. The United States of America had steadied itself on the foundation of a new kind of constitution. The colonies had held on to their fragile alliance through disagreements and other constant difficulties. We are lucky. At most any point during those struggles, the alliance could have crumbled. But here we are, more than 220 years later, still on a roll. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
We make Pennsylvania happen!
Well, the worst of times they don't faze me. Even if I look and act really crazy, I won't wait till she betrayed me. Now my vision is no longer hazy. I'm very lucky to have my crew. Bitch to find me when she flew. I've been knocked down, beat down, black and blue.
She's not the one coming back for you. She's not the one coming back for you. If I fall back down,
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com, and you can go. You can go to the big gala event there in Washington, D.C. If you're in town on October the 14th. Begins at 6:30 at the Arena Stage there in Washington, D.C. For more information, ourfuture.org/gala. Again, the honorees, New York Mayor Bill de Blasio, AFSCME President Lee Saunders, and Saru Yaraman. She is the co-founder and co-director of the Rock United Restaurant Opportunity Centers United. And I've met her a number of times, and I think she's fantastic. This idea that we're going to take this low wage workforce and begin to give them some power and some voice, I think is well needed, and something that we need to be pushing across the spectrum. And this is where, when you look at what's going on in Philadelphia with education, and you look at what's going on in York, and you look at what's going on with the fast food workers, and you look at all of this kind of bubbling that's going on, this kind of, people looking around going, is this right? Is this how things have to be? Can't we do better than this? We've been told for so long, we're number one, that maybe we should be expecting that we are number one. Just a thought. And, talking with Tim Slekar there a bit ago with the Henry Rollins quote, that, if we want the best businesses and the best military, we should have the best education. I would argue that deliberately they don't, because you always, and I guess this is one of those silly phrases from a bad movie, but the movie Dutch with Ed O'Neill, the guy from Married with Children, the little snot-nosed kid that he had to pick up at the private school for Thanksgiving, or I think it was for Thanksgiving. The kid said that in every economy you need hand workers, and there's this belief that especially by the upper echelon, that you still need epsilons. You still need the hand workers. You still need the mindless, and you need a way to control them. And, as I've been looking at this stuff, it takes me back to a comment a friend who works for the Department of Welfare said, if you educated everyone and they all got college degrees, and you educated everyone that by jumping through these hoops, you would find yourself in the middle class. If you have all these people who have these expectations that they deserve an education, a decent job, a middle-class existence, what happens when you can't provide it? What if magically 100% of all students graduated and were ready for college? What happens if 100% are then turning around going, hey, what's in it for us? And part of me goes that this is systematically put into place so that you have, based on socioeconomics and not so much race. I don't know that the race is the underlying cause as much as it is about economics. Poor will be poor, rich will remain rich, and the middle class, chances are you're going to end up poor soon. Because what's gone on is the very wealthy go, hey, you've got something we want. And what's happening is you're seeing this friction which is why we're seeing the rise of the Tea Party. And look, at the beginning, as I've said, I was in favor of an uprising. I was right there with the Tea Party at the beginning going, you're right. You're right. Our jobs have been shipped overseas and we need better policy. Problem is they were going, wait a minute, it's the government's fault. It's not the corporations. It's not the wealthies. It's those unions' fault. It's not, it's not these billionaire corporations who are shifting jobs. Not them. It's those unions who wanted better wages, better hours, better conditions. And they lost me, completely lost me. So as I look at this and I look at all of this bubbling of activity, this people looking up, going, hey, this isn't right, tells me there's opportunity. Hopefully we begin to change things. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people, come to talk.
Ain't gonna take it, it's our time. We want the world and we want it now. We're gonna take it anyhow. We want the airwaves.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
Do you believe, sir, in global warming?
Senator Mitch McConnell dodges the climate change question.
Do you believe humans are contributing significantly to climate change?
Well, I've said all along climate is changing.
This is yes or no.
Look,
Yes
this
or
is
Republican candidates retreat from climate denial. U.S. auto fleet achieves record fuel efficiency. Plus,
is regular clean enough for your family? Not when you can have clean coal clean.
clean coal goes online in Canada. But there's a catch.
Say it ain't so. All of those catches and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Senator, that's a yes or no question. Do you believe in global warming?
It is not a yes or no question.
Old boy came out a little defensive, a little ballsy, I think, with a little attitude.
a little bit of a jerk, maybe, came across as.
A little bit of a jerk? Not my Senator Mitch McConnell. This is your Green News Report. Yep. Okay, Desi Doyen. So the climate change denialism from Republicans in the primaries is now coming back to haunt the Republicans in the generals.
Yup. But we'll have more on that in a moment. First, good news. The U.S. has hit a record for fuel efficiency. Despite 40 years of obstruction from the U.S. auto industry, the Obama administration in 2009 finally succeeded in setting higher mileage standards for cars and trucks so you don't have to buy so much gas. And now the Environmental Protection Agency announced this week that new cars and trucks sold in the U.S. have hit a record for fuel economy, 24 miles per gallon fleet-wide. And surprise, the auto industry did not collapse.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought that nobody wanted fuel-efficient cars and that it would, like everything else Republicans are concerned about, destroy the economy.
And again, they were wrong. Meanwhile, with the midterm elections less than 1 month away, finally, the corporate media has decided that climate change is now a thing and is asking about it in every major race. So, of course, now Republicans are backing off their earlier outright denial in the primaries, since now they have to appeal to voters in the general election. In Colorado, the Republican candidate for U.S. Senator, Representative Cory Gardner, tried retreat and evasion.
Do you believe humans are contributing significantly to climate change?
Well, I've said all along climate is
This
changing.
is yes or no.
Look,
Yes
this
or
is an important issue, and I don't think you can say yes
But
or no.
you've got
to
60
important
seconds after.
I believe the climate is changing. I disagree to the extent that has been in the news that man has caused.
Congressman. And Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky evaded the question, too, with the old "I am not a scientist" dodge. And he did it twice in 1 week.
We can debate this forever. George Will had a column in the last year or so pointing out that in the 70s we were concerned that the Ice Age was coming. I'm not a scientist.
Yeah, neither is Fox News' George Will, by the way. And in the 70s, when there was a tiny handful of scientists concerned about an ice age, the majority of climate scientists were still worried about global warming that guys like Mitch McConnell pretend is not going on.
Now, that interview was with the Cincinnati Enquirer. McConnell did it again in a testy interview with Kentucky Sports Radio.
Do you believe, sir, in global warming?
have said repeatedly is I'm not a scientist, but what I can tell you is even if you thought that was important, and there's some scientists who do and some scientists who don't, but even if you thought that was important, the United States doing this by itself is going to have zero impact.
So do you, but that's a yes, Senator, that's a yes or no question. Do you believe in global warming?
It is not a yes or no question. I'm not a scientist.
I love the fact that he's not a scientist, but he is a scientist enough to know that doing anything about the problem will have no effect on the global climate. Go figure.
Yeah.
Mitch McConnell, occasional scientist.
Meanwhile, in an attempt to save the coal industry from its own pollution, the U.S. taxpayer has already spent over $5 billion on an experimental plant to capture carbon emissions from burning coal. That's commonly referred to as clean coal.
Clean coal harnesses the awesome power of the word clean.
Clean coal is supported by the coal industry, the most trusted name in coal.
Yes, it is.
Now, that expensive experimental plant in the U.S. is in Mississippi. But in Canada, the world's first carbon capture coal plant is now online. But there's a catch to these projects, as noted by Chris Hayes on MSNBC.
We will be actually selling the carbon dioxide to an oil company to help them take more petroleum out of the ground.
You heard that right. The carbon captured by this clean coal plant is going to facilitate oil drilling.
Hooray! By the way, kudos to Chris Hayes. You know, we have been beating up on the media for years for not covering climate change, and Chris Hayes has been doing all week a special on coal country with a lot of great stories and a lot of great interviews. So we should note when someone in the mainstream media actually gives this issue the coverage it deserves. For much more of the coverage it deserves, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. While you're there, please consider a donation to help the Green News Report stay on your public airwaves. Don't forget, you can find us and follow us on the Twitters and the Facebook at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Can you hear the death knell toll for old King Cole?
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So we're still here, still alive, still doing well. I feel pretty good today. Yeah, I woke up little sniffles, but I don't know if that's a symptom of Ebola, because I'm being told we're all going to die. It's all over. The game is over. That's pack the bags, right? Is that what we've heard? Or maybe I'm just blowing things out of proportion and maybe making light of the fact that it's a horrible situation, but it is not the end of the world. Anyway, here to talk a little bit about what's going on in Washington, D.C., around the world, our good friend Bob Ney, Talk Radio News Service. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick.
Happy Friday to you.
Oh, yes.
Always looking forward to the weekend. So will we make it into the weekend?
Well, I think as long as you stay out of Dallas Hospital, you'll be okay. And they might send you home. You know, this talk of the lawsuit, if there's anything that they could sue over, it would be the fact that, you know, he went there. He told them he was coming from Liberia, and they sent him home. And, you know, some people are saying, well, he lied when he left there. Okay, let's say he lied when he left the country. The fact remains he told them at the hospital. So, right. But, you know, lawsuit or no lawsuit, the bigger issue is preparedness in other emergency rooms, how to cope with this, how to handle it.
The question that I have is, did he have health insurance? Because there was something running around that maybe he didn't have health insurance, which is maybe the reason that they sent him away. Because as you know, in this country, if you can go to the hospital. And they will see you if you're going to die at that moment. But if you're not in imminent danger of death at that moment, they just send you along, as I understand it. So any word from your end of this guy had health insurance or not?
Well, we're told he didn't have it, you know, and these days, and it's such a paperwork nightmare. They have certain requirements for certain things, and you're to stay X amount of time for a certain procedure. I mean, that's what it boiled down to, a ton of bureaucracy also, even with the health care. So, but in his case, they say he didn't have health care, but there's so much unknown.
Yeah. But to me, then it brings up that next question. if the guy doesn't have health care, was he just sent away out of hand because he didn't? And it's not that they didn't take his illness seriously. It's just, hey, you don't have health care. We're not getting paid. There's the door.
Yeah, I don't know. The one thing, even if he didn't have health care, them knowing he came from Liberia, I mean, somebody had to say, wow. Supposedly, they clicked it into a certain part of the computer, then it didn't pop up to the person that says go home or not. Is what happened. But I
wait
know
a second.
that.
Stop. Walk back. There's actually a computer at the front desk of the hospital that has a flow chart in there that goes beyond common sense and humans going, wait a second. The guy says he's putting 2 and 2 together without the computer. Tell me that's not true.
Well, now here's what they do. They type in to this computer, and I've actually I had a good friend in the hospital for a 5-day stay, and I actually saw this happen. They come in, they check this, the floor nurse, the emergency room physician, whoever, and they input into this system, and the system's supposed to be, comprehensive. So they would put in there, came from, and this definitely was put in there, came from Liberia, had been in Liberia. Supposedly, after that was inputted into the system, it was in, and I'm not a computer guy, so please forgive me. It was in one window, but then it wasn't sent to the other one. So therefore, whoever sat there and said, you stay, you go, etc., did not see that information. That's the best I have on that.
So we have a computer glitch. And this is my problem with computers doing everything for us, because no longer do we have critical thinkers. We just have people who input things into a computer.
Mm-hmm.
That's
right.
All right. So there we go. I guess the head of the CDC is saying we should not have a travel ban. Is that true?
Well, after talking to you and sharing your points of view on many things, including this, I went ahead and read this very, very carefully. People are starting, and this is not a political thing of the right or the left. People in general are starting to say, wait a minute, how can we keep letting people in? There's mess ups like Dallas. What happens? So now they've been asking the head of the CDC, what does he think? Now, here's what he said. He said that that if we stop flights from those affected countries, these countries might stop working with the international community as they refuse to report cases because they fear the consequences of a border closing.
Right.
Well, frankly, if they stop the flights, everybody's going to stop them anyway, so there's no issue down the road. Well, America stopped them, but the rest of the world's going to keep them going. And also it says, this is the other thing, stopping planes from flying from West Africa would severely limit the ability of Americans to return to the United States. Well, not really. I mean, we airlifted a doctor out of there. Let's say, Rick, hypothetically, we have 200 Americans. It'll be easier to airlift out 200 Americans than to have 200 people come back here and you try to track them down around America. And he said people with dual citizenship would have a difficult time to get home. He also said, in addition to not stopping the spread of Ebola, isolating countries will make it harder to respond to Ebola, creating an even greater humanitarian and healthcare emergency.
That sounds like a political answer to me and not an actual answer.
That's what I thought. Scientifically, the CDC, Center for Disease Control, the control part, this sounded more like a political answer. It seems to me a worldwide effort containing areas and trying to treat it versus having this spread to India, China, America. To me, seems like more humanitarian to put the whole ball of wax, all of our effort, all of our money, all of our personnel into going down to those areas. If, in fact, let's say 1,000 people become infected, it's going to be easier to control and, 3 flights of 300 people each that all have it. I mean, I'm oversimplifying this, but it's going to be easier than what he's saying. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. The other question I have is how much traffic do we have back and forth between countries like Liberia and Sierra Leone and Ghana? How much traffic do we have between those countries? I often wonder.
Well, I don't know. Nobody's really answered that. I don't. They talked about business, and frankly, they've talked about business, and frankly, people saying, well, we need to keep their economy going down there. Well, if we don't do something about the disease, I don't think it's going to matter about the economy down there. And so some of the corporations may have some concerns, about their travel. I don't know. It's not a simple answer, but I just can't imagine we just don't start taking some more measures. I can't imagine.
Yeah, and what's frustrating to me is as you're going through this, the guy who's the head of the CDC's comments, I'm going, the CDC should not be political. This guy should be going, our job is controlling disease, and this is how it's done. And he should be going, we should be spending more money on this, on research and development, so we find a cure, so that when we have it isolated there, we can eradicate it right there.
And here's another statement. Isolating communities also increases people's distrust of government, making them less likely to cooperate to help stop Ebola. I don't think a person in the remote areas of Africa is going to start thinking, oh, that government's isolated me. That person wants vaccines and medicines. I don't think they're going to say, I'm going to mistrust the United States government now.
Yeah,
not that the UN.
Not that they don't already mistrust the U.S. government.
Exactly. Yeah. So.
Yeah,
I just thought it was a very strange answer.
And it is. And to me, it immediately sounded like a political answer instead of a medical answer or one of how we control this. Just a lot of it there. Anyway, let's move along. Evidently, the State Department says there's some. They put out a threat report?
Now, this one is. I know what's going to happen with some of the media saying, "Oh, the look what they did in the embassies." Frankly, though, the most telling line of this entire report is towards the end, and it says that to ease the problems, the Inspector General, this is the Inspector General's office, this is not the Congressional Committee, issued 20 recommendations ranging from a review of the structure, management, and manpower needs. But it also said that there is to raise a greater concern that decision makers at the State Department may not have complete and accurate information with which to make risk management decisions. That, combined with the fact that they only spend, and I mean only, $72 million worldwide for the security measures, means that, and I hate to break this to the Hillary Clinton naysayers, but obviously a lot of information from the intelligence entities, according to this report, never reached the state.
Well, is that surprising? I mean, we were told after 9/11 that, with the Patriot Act, all of this was going to end. We weren't going to have this secrecy between the agencies, that everyone was going to have a kumbaya moment and sharing information. Does anybody really think that's going on?
Well, look at the case. Look, you make a great point. Look at the case where the man called up and said, hey, my son is really off balance and he's going to do something, and he's flying to London, and he's come from this African country, I think it was, or from Kenya or somewhere, and you better do something, and nobody told anybody about it.
Yeah, no, it's and to me, the other part of this is, you said 72 million is what the budget it was for this, and you go 72 million, right?
Right.
And you go, is that nearly enough to have embassies in every country around the world? Because one of the things that got me about the Republicans going after Benghazi, weren't they the ones who cut a good portion of their funding, that even if you wanted to hype up manpower there, you wouldn't have had the resources to do it?
Well, yes, and that's the point, because if you're going to have embassies and you're going to have problems, which we do all over the world, and the size of our embassies in our country, you're going to have to pay for it. If you don't pay for it, and this mentions staff, inadequate staffing levels. This is a very interesting report. Now, some are going to twist parts of it, don't get me wrong, but if you really look at this report in depth, it's Hillary Clinton's position, and it's a telling report to see where we go down the road, putting all politics aside.
And that's, I hope the point is that it's about how we make sure we don't have another Benghazi, and how we keep our people safe in these foreign forward land.
Yes.
Well, but I'm sure it will be twisted, because it's all about Benghazi. And finally, India and Pakistan coming together.
Yes, two of the Nobel Peace Prize nominees, one's from India And Malala, of course, she's famous for being shot by the Taliban, and what an inspiring young lady. And an Indian activist. He's been supporting children's rights, not using children and trafficking them for years. And so India and Pakistan may not get along, but two wonderful people from their countries in the bright spot today have received the Nobel Prize nod.
Yeah, the guy from India, one of the quotes that keeps running around that I keep seeing him coming up with is that, the Indian people are wonderful, but Indian politicians, not so much.
Right. Well, yeah, there's a long way to go. And like our country, they've got a great country, great people, but a long way to go.
All righty. Bob, always great talking with you. I appreciate you taking time for us.
Too. Thank you.
Our good friend Bob Ney, Talk Radio News Service. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
It's always inspiring to see global corporate giants crush small farmers, stomp on nature, circumvent our laws by hook or crook, and deceive and gouge consumers. Welcome once again to the phantasmagoric world of DNA manipulators. In particular, this branch of genetic engineering wizardry calls itself, quote, synthetic biology. Yes, that's an oxymoron, meaning fake life. But it's also moronic in this case, for it's a crude and costly attempt by high-tech alchemists at such corporate powers as BASF and Cargill to genetically modify microorganisms to produce something wholly unnecessary, artificial flavorings and fragrances. One of their, quote, achievements is to use a powerful form of gene-altering technology to re-engineer yeast and make synthetic vanilla. Hello, of all the world's needs, why put so much money and scientific energy into something that's on every grocery shelf, both in a natural and artificial form? Also, this corporate wizardry creates a massive threat to the livelihoods of thousands of small tropical farmers in developing nations. Madagascar, for example, one of the world's poorest countries, has 80,000 farmers whose only viable cash crop is vanilla beans. I really count on that to make a living, says one. Well, sniff the farmers, we can do it cheaper. But can do is not the same as will do. Even though the lab-made vanilla is not as good as nature's own, corporations will use their political and marketing muscle to capture the market and jack up prices. Advertising gimmickry is already in play, for the industry claims that its fake stuff is a natural product. Therefore, it need not be labeled as a GMO, even though it is. This is Jim Hightower saying, to get a bigger whiff of this outrage, go to Friends of the Earth at FOE.org.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's populist take on what the powers that be are up to. Find out more at hightowerlowdown.org.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So it's 10-10 day. And what does 10-10 day mean? Well, that's where they want to raise the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. And as I said earlier, I think the minimum wage should be higher than that. Although the advocates are saying, well, that's what we think we can get now. 2 bus tours have kicked off. One with the nuns on the bus. They're kicking off the We the People, We the Voters bus tour. And the folks from Americans United for Change have the bus tour put the middle class first. They're going to be going around the country highlighting the fact that, you know what? We need to be pushing the issues that middle class, working class families find important. And minimum wage being one of those. paid family leave being another one of those. There's a full day kindergarten, pre-K programs. There's a lot of stuff we could be doing to make working families their lives a little bit easier. And for me, it comes down to pushing the Hillary Clintons and the Bill de Blasios and these politicians into doing, because look, they're just the tools. They're the tools to get the things that we need. So when, for 30 years now, what they've done is that masterfully, you got to give the corporatists really credit. They have figured out how to get us to despise the only tool that we have to fight them with. That's the truth. The only way that you're going to push back against what these big multinational corporate interests are going to push down our throats is by using government. We know that. And, the reality is they've got us looking at our government with a jaundiced eye, going, well, that's the problem. Don't you know, Rick? It's those government people. When all those government people are just tools. If we were to push more progressive candidates, if we were to push more working class voices into the halls of Congress, instead of just making it the millionaire and billionaire club, well, actually millionaire, I don't think there are any billionaires yet. I don't think Grand Theft Auto, Daryl Issa is near the billionaire mark yet, but they are beholden to the billionaire club. So I think and these bus tours, I think, are important. I know in the coming days and weeks, we're going to see more of a push to get folks out around the minimum wage. And I got to tell you, I really thought that would be an issue in the gubernatorial race here in Pennsylvania to kind of show the difference between the two Toms, Tom Wolf and Tom Corbett. But to be honest, I don't think you really needed it. I think Corbett has done such a poor job of defining what it is that he has done, because he really hasn't done anything good. I guess that's part of the reason. But he's done such a poor job of running a campaign that I don't think it's really been one of those necessary issues. Who knows? There's still 3 weeks and a couple of days before the November 4th election, of which make sure it is marked on the calendar, because the polls may be showing that Tom Wolf is up, but the only way that he wins, or any of the candidates win, is if people actually vote for them. So don't expect someone else to do it. Do it yourself. A little bit earlier in the program, we talked with Jeremy Rosen about the National Homeless Day of Action. And I found it interesting. The other day I was reading an article about in Los Angeles, where evidently on Skid Row, they've actually built a new complex, 102 unit housing complex specifically for homeless people, that opened up on Wednesday. And again, in this, you're going to have the access of health and human services. People are going to be able to get mental health treatments. They're going to be able to get, health care, a little bit of health care, so that, they can become active, productive members of society. And the costs far lower than you would find if you just left people on the streets. And study after study has shown that it's actually 3 times more expensive just to kick people to the curb. And you go, well, how's that possible? And I go, think about it this way. We spend a lot of money on shelters. We spend a lot of money on tax breaks for churches who do these kind of things, and soup kitchens and all this stuff. We could have just taken that money and given people homes. Instead of homeless, again, but thinking about it, instead of homelessness, I don't think it's homes that people want. I think it's houses or shelter or place to live. Home is kind of one of those ideas. A house is what you actually need. A place to live is what you actually need. So when you look at this, I think locking people up and throwing people in jail at $30,000 a year. What if we just took that money and gave them a house? I mean, you stop and think about a lot of the dumb things we do policy-wise. especially when you're talking, look at education, the classroom to prison pipeline that we find. It would be far cheaper to give people 4-year degrees than it would be to lock them up, but we still lock people up in record amounts. And a lot of it turns into, just this constant recidivism, locking people up. Where I said, maybe on the early end, if we spent that money early, maybe we wouldn't have some of the societal problems that we have. And on the homelessness front, it never made any sense to me to just lock somebody up because they were, or give them tickets. My favorite one is you cite people for loitering or vagrancy, and then they don't have the money to pay it. So you put them in jail. You go, well, what was the point of that? You knew they didn't have the money. It just makes sense to me, and it's good to see that there is a movement. I talked about Denver a couple of weeks ago. They've all opened up a really big complex, and I've said before we should be retrofitting some of these huge factories, make those places for people to live. Very small mini units for just people to lay their head. Makes good sense. Anyway, if you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take it wherever you go, when you go. Also, if you want to email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Love to hear from you. Thanks for being here. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.